Have you ever wondered what secrets ancient civilizations left behind, hidden in plain sight for thousands of years? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where we explore the world's most mysterious archaeological finds, legends, and artifacts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's begin. The 3,000-year-old mummy hairstyle, ancient beauty secrets of Egypt. Close your eyes and imagine the desert at twilight. The air is still warm, but the heat of the day is slipping into the coolness of night. The sand stretches out endlessly, golden and quiet, carrying with it the weight of thousands of years. Along the Nile, where reeds sway and the waters move with unbroken patience, the people of ancient Egypt once carried out their lives, weaving together ritual and beauty, survival and grace. It is here, among tombs and temples, that we find not only treasures of gold and hieroglyphs etched in stone, but also something more intimate, more human, an ancient hairstyle preserved in the wrappings of a 3,000-year-old mummy. It may seem small at first glance, just strands of hair, still arranged carefully despite the centuries, but this hairstyle whispers stories. It speaks of what it meant to live in that world, what it meant to be seen, admired, remembered, and tonight we'll wander slowly through those secrets, tracing the way ancient Egyptians cared for their hair, the oils they used, the braids they wove, and the hidden meanings they carried in each strand. Let your mind settle as we drift gently through the quiet beauty rituals of a civilization that never truly faded. Hair was never just hair to the Egyptians. It was status, identity, and sometimes even protection. A young girl in a village might wear two braids that hung neatly down her shoulders, while a noblewoman might adorn her hair with beads of faience or strands of gold thread. A priest might shave his head entirely, not as a matter of style but of ritual purity, and yet, across this wide spectrum, hair carried meaning, almost as if it was another language spoken without words. Archaeologists, when unwrapping mummies, found more than bones and linen. They found hair perfectly preserved, shaped in ways that revealed forgotten fashions. One discovery in particular revealed a woman, her hair styled in a complex set of braids and waves, preserved so precisely that scholars could study every strand. Imagine the hands that arranged it, perhaps another woman, perhaps a skilled servant, smoothing, twisting, weaving. The care taken was not only for life, but for eternity. The Egyptians believed that how you looked in life carried into the afterlife. The gods, they thought, would see you as you had chosen to present yourself, so every detail mattered. Hair had to be right. To die with it undone or unkempt was unthinkable. And so, even in death, their hairstyles endured. Silent reminders of lives once lived, of beauty once celebrated. Close your eyes deeper now, and imagine yourself walking into an ancient Egyptian household. The air is cool inside, shaded from the harsh sun by mud brick walls. In the corner, a woman sits on a stool while another carefully oils her hair. A jar of castor oil rests open, its earthy scent rising in the room. The hair is long, dark, and glossy, brushed smooth with a comb carved from bone. The comb's teeth pass gently through the strands, tugging here and there, pulling out tangles. There is no hurry. These are moments of care, of patience. Oils were everything to the Egyptians. They mixed castor oil, almond oil, and even animal fats to create ointments for the hair. They perfumed these oils with myrrh, or frankincense, letting the fragrance linger. Hair was often scented, a living cloud of aroma that followed a person through the streets of Thebes or Memphis. To meet someone was not only to see them but to smell them, to know the subtle presence they carried. And there were wigs, glorious wigs, worn not only by the wealthy but also by those who wanted to escape the heat of the desert sun. Real hair wigs, crafted with incredible skill, braided and curled in ways that natural hair sometimes could not achieve. Imagine a nobleman preparing for a festival, his servants placing a wig upon his shaved head, carefully adjusting it until it sat perfectly. These wigs were not just functional, they were art. They were beauty made tangible, a second identity resting just above the skin. But even wigs were more than vanity, they were protection. To shave the head was to keep clean, to guard against lice, but to wear a wig was to step into the world with presence, with dignity. Each curl, each braid, told others who you were. A high priest might wear a wig of tightly curled locks, while a queen might have long flowing strands, decorated with beads and ornaments of gold. The wig became a crown of its own, a statement to gods and men alike. The 3,000-year-old mummy with her hairstyle preserved reminds us that this was not only about wealth. Ordinary women, too, cared deeply for their hair. Braid patterns varied from village to village, from one community to another. A mother might plait her daughter's hair in the morning before chores, just as mothers do today, weaving care into each twist. And at night the braids might be undone, oiled once more and left loose beneath the stars. There is something profoundly timeless about this. Across centuries, hair has been a thread connecting us to beauty, identity, and memory. The Egyptians remind us that what we do each day, brushing, combing, arranging, has always mattered. And perhaps that's why the hairstyle was preserved, not because it was rare, but because it was human. A reminder that long after empires crumble, the small acts remain. Drift with me now, further into their world. Imagine the tools spread out on a low wooden table. Ivory combs, bronze razors, small jars of perfumed oil, and little pins of wood or copper to hold braids in place. The light flickers from an oil lamp, casting shadows on the wall. A servant dips her fingers into the oil, rubs it between her palms, and works it gently into the hair before her. The strands shine in the dim glow, dark and rich, like silk. Slowly she parts it, begins to braid, fingers moving rhythmically, as if weaving a quiet spell. The room smells faintly of lotus blossoms, of beeswax, of sandalwood. In the bustling markets of Memphis, women bought ointments for hair as readily as bread or fish. Vendors sold small cones of scented fat, which could be placed atop the head. As the heat of the sun melted the cone, the perfume would trickle through the hair, releasing fragrance hour by hour. Imagine walking through the crowd and catching the scent of myrrh or lotus, drifting past, subtle, lingering. Hair was never silent, it spoke in scent as much as in sight, and yet, there was always more. Hairstyles carried social messages. Married women wore their hair differently than unmarried ones. Children had distinctive cuts, often shaved with a single lock left to grow long, a side lock that marked their youth. Soldiers, too, wore their hair in ways that identified them. To look at a person's head was to know their place in society. It was a language written not in ink, but in strands of hair. The 3,000-year-old hairstyle preserved on a mummy might have belonged to a noblewoman, or to someone whose family wanted her remembered beautifully. The braids suggest patience, time, and care, none of which were wasted in their eyes. For to be remembered was to live forever. To carry beauty into eternity was a final statement. This was who I was. This was how I wished to be seen. And so we pause here, in the quiet presence of that ancient hairstyle, imagining the hands that touched it, the oils that perfumed it, the eyes that once admired it. A secret beauty carried across 3 millennia, waiting patiently in the silence of a tomb, only to whisper once more to us now. As you listen, let your thoughts drift as slowly as the Nile itself. See the braids shimmering in lamplight, the combs resting nearby, the jars of fragrant oil unopened for centuries. The past lingers, not only in temples or monuments, but in these small, intimate details. A strand of hair, a preserved braid, a fragrance imagined. And as you sink deeper into rest, remember that the Egyptians believed beauty itself was eternal, that what is cared for never truly fades. That in each strand of hair, in each ritual of care, there was a kind of immortality. Tonight, as you drift into dreams, perhaps you too will carry with you that sense of timelessness, that calm, unbroken thread stretching back across centuries, where beauty and life, love and memory, were woven together as delicately as braids in the hair of a long-forgotten queen. Pericles' lost wine cup, unearthing the first citizen of Athens. The evening settles gently over the hills of Attica. The air is soft, touched by the scent of olive groves, and the horizon glows faintly with the last light of the sun as it slips into the sea beyond Piraeus. The city of Athens is alive still, though shadows lengthen across its narrow streets. Merchants close their stalls. Philosophers gather in small clusters to continue their endless debates. Children play in courtyards until their mothers call them inside. And somewhere, perhaps in a quiet home lit only by the flicker of a clay lamp, a man sets down his cup. A cup so ordinary it could be mistaken for thousands like it. A wine cup, shallow, with handles curved like wings. Yet this one belonged to Pericles, the statesman, the orator, the man who shaped Athens into a beacon for all time. Imagine now, drifting slowly through centuries, to find that cup again, buried beneath the dust of ages, unearthed by accident, its fragments pieced together until the name Pericles revealed itself in faint letters. It is more than clay, it is a whisper from a hand that once held it, from lips that once touched its rim, from evenings where laughter and argument and ambition spilled as freely as the wine it carried. Tonight, we wander not through the grandeur of temples or the clamor of battles, but through this single object, the lost wine cup of Pericles, and the quiet, timeless beauty of what it tells us about Athens, about life, about being remembered. Close your eyes and picture it. The city, nearly 2,500 years ago. Athens in the 5th century before our era. The air is alive with possibility. Democracy has taken root here. Still fragile, still experimental, but pulsing with energy. Citizens gather in the ecclesia, the assembly, their voices rising in debate, in decision, in the shaping of laws. The Parthenon is being built, its marble blocks rising steadily under the hands of skilled craftsmen. Plays are performed in the theater of Dionysus, laughter and tears carrying across the open air. The sea glitters with the sails of Athenian ships. their triremes cutting swiftly through the waters, bearing both trade and power. And among it all walks Pericles, tall, serene, a man whose voice could quiet a crowd or stir it to action. Yet for all his greatness, Pericles was also human, and humans drink wine. They sit with friends, they lift their cups, they argue late into the night, spilling words and stories across a table. The cup we hold in mind tonight was not gold, not jewel-encrusted, not made to dazzle. It was clay, simple, humble, a vessel of daily life. Perhaps that is why it matters. Because through it we glimpse not only the statesman, but the man, the laughter, the companionship, the small moments that shape memory more deeply than monuments. Wine in Athens was more than drink. It was ritual. It was conversation. It was philosophy poured from jug to cup. At the symposium, the drinking party, men reclined on couches, sharing stories, reciting poetry, debating questions of life and virtue. Music played softly in the background, a flute or a lyre. Servants moved quietly, with trays of figs, olives, and roasted meats. The wine was mixed with water in a great bowl, the crater, for to drink it unmixed was considered barbaric. Each cup carried not only taste but meaning, how much one drank, how one offered a toast, how one responded to the games and questions passed around. To share wine was to share mind and spirit. Pericles, they say, was measured even here. He did not drink to excess, nor did he dominate conversations with arrogance. He listened, he guided, he spoke with calm authority. Imagine him now, reclining on a couch, his fingers resting lightly on the handle of that cup, listening as a younger man, perhaps a soldier just returned from campaign, or a poet eager to impress, spoke with fire. Pericles would smile, respond with patience, turn the thought into something larger, something that touched not only the present but the future. The cup passed from hand to hand, refilled, lifted again as the night drifted on. Centuries later, the cup lay forgotten, broken, scattered in the soil. A city had risen and fallen, stones toppled, empires passed across Greece, Rome, Byzantium and beyond. And then in modern times, archaeologists brushing through earth found fragments that, when pieced together, revealed the scratched letters of a name so familiar, Pericles. The cup had endured not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary, and in that ordinariness it held eternity. Think of the hands that touched it again when it was found. The archaeologist, kneeling in the dust, brushing gently, lifting the shard with care. The silence of the site broken only by the murmur of colleagues, the soft scratching of tools. Piece by piece, the cup was reborn, its surface carrying the faint memory of long-ago lips, the warmth of wine that once filled it, the weight of history it never knew it carried. As you breathe slowly, imagine the world around that cup, the flickering lamplight of a Greek home, the walls painted with scenes of gods and heroes, the laughter of friends gathered close, the songs sung softly at the end of the evening, when the wine had slowed and voices lowered. In that setting, the cup was part of life itself, an object that asked for no attention, yet held all the weight of companionship. What makes it powerful now is not that it belonged to Pericles the statesman, but that it belonged to Pericles the man. To drink is to live, and to share drink is to live together. Through his cup we glimpse not only the leader of Athens but the humanity of Athens itself, ordinary and extraordinary, all at once. The Athenians believed strongly in memory. To be remembered was to live forever. Tombs, statues, inscriptions, all were ways of keeping a name alive. And yet how curious that a simple wine cup, forgotten for centuries, should return to us now, carrying the name of the man most remembered of all. Perhaps it is fitting, for Pericles built monuments that touched the sky, but he also lifted cups that touched the lips. His greatness was built on both the public and the private, the eternal and the fleeting. As you drift with me through these thoughts, let your breathing slow to the rhythm of the Aegean tide. Hear the waves against the harbor of Piraeus. See the sails furled as night settles. Smell the faint aroma of oil lamps burning in homes across the hills. And in one of those homes, centuries ago, a man lifts his cup. Clay, simple, unadorned, he drinks, he speaks, he lives. And somehow, across time, the echo of that moment reaches you now. The cup of Pericles whispers that history is not only written in marble or ink, it is written in clay, in objects touched daily, in the smallest fragments of life. And as you rest, know that even the quietest moments, the cup you lift, the conversation you share, are part of something eternal. That perhaps is the truest legacy of Athens, of Pericles, and of the cup that bore his name. So close your eyes more fully now. Let the voices of Athens fade into the distance. Let the soft glow of oil lamps dim. The cup rests once more, empty, yet filled with memory. You too may rest, carried by the gentle thought that the past endures not only in great deeds, but in small ones, in cups lifted and set down, in lives lived quietly, beautifully, and well, and as sleep takes you, remember that in every fragment of life, there is history, there is meaning, and there is peace. The Astronomical Compendium of 1550, a Renaissance masterpiece of Italy. The night sky has always been a mystery, long before telescopes, long before electric light, long before men dreamed of rockets and satellites. The heavens were a living map. People looked up and wondered, what governs these lights? Why do some wander while others remain fixed? What does it mean when a star burns brighter or a comet blazes across the dark? For centuries, those questions stirred minds and shaped civilizations. And then, in the heart of the Renaissance, when Italy's cities shone with art and discovery, someone placed those mysteries into a single object, small enough to hold in your hand, yet vast enough to hold the cosmos itself. It was called an astronomical compendium, created around the year 1550. This delicate instrument was both clock and compass, astrolabe and calendar, a masterpiece of precision. Made of gleaming brass, engraved with lines and numbers so fine they almost whispered, it folded upon itself like a book of secrets. Within it, the heavens unfolded, the hours, the phases of the moon, the march of the sun, the directions of the compass rose, all woven together into one breathtaking tool. Tonight, we'll walk slowly through that compendium, not with haste, but with wonder. Imagining the world of Renaissance Italy, the minds that built such things, the hands that turned its dials beneath candlelight, and the dreams of the stars it carried. Picture, if you will, Florence in the mid-16th century. The streets are narrow, cobblestones worn by generations of footsteps. The air carries the scent of bread from bakeries, of wax from candle makers, of ink from the shops where books are copied and sold. Above it all rise the great domes and towers, the Duomo with its impossible roof of red tiles, built by Brunelleschi a century before, still astonishing, those who lift their eyes to it. Art flourishes here, the frescoes of Vasari, the sculptures of Michelangelo, the drawings of Leonardo, though he himself has already passed. It is an age where curiosity knows no limits, where men and women believe that to study nature is to understand the divine. And among the treasures of that age are instruments, delicate, intricate, polished with care, made not only for function but for beauty. The Compendium of 1550 was one such treasure. To see it is to see both science and art woven seamlessly together. Imagine a small case of brass, about the size of a hand. It opens with hinges, each panel revealing another layer of knowledge. On one side, a sundial, its gnomon folding delicately into place, ready to cast a shadow when lifted to the sun. On another, a lunar calendar, tracking the waxing and waning of the moon. A compass lies within, its needle steady, aligning always with the Earth's unseen pull, and engraved across its shining face are the zodiac signs, the months of the year, the hours of the day, all drawn in flowing Renaissance script. One could hold it in a pocket, travel with it on a journey, consult it on a ship at sea or in a study by candlelight. To own such an object was to hold the universe itself, reduced and ordered, made comprehensible by human hands. And yet there was more than practicality here. There was wonder, for to trace your fingers along its dials was to feel that you were touching something eternal, a bridge between heaven and earth. Close your eyes and imagine it being used. A scholar sits at a wooden desk, the flame of a candle flickering beside him. His study smells of parchment, ink, and oil. He opens the compendium carefully, the brass cool beneath his touch. Outside, the bells of Florence toll the hour, their sound drifting through the night air. He tilts the sundial toward the window, watching the faint light of dawn touch its face. He consults the calendar, noting the moon's phase, recording it in his ledger. He adjusts the compass, perhaps preparing for a journey to Venice or Rome, and then he pauses, simply gazing at it, lost in thought. To him, this is not only a tool, it is a mirror of the cosmos, a reminder that the heavens, though vast, can be traced, measured, understood. The Renaissance was filled with such moments. Men and women believed the world was ordered, that God had written it in the language of geometry and proportion. To study the stars was not to abandon faith but to approach it. And so instruments like the compendium were made not only for navigation or timekeeping, but for devotion. They were acts of reverence, art crafted in metal, honoring the idea that the universe could be known. Think of the craftsman who made it. Somewhere in Italy, perhaps in Milan or Venice, a skilled artisan bent over his bench. Before him lay sheets of brass, tools of engraving, tiny rulers, compasses, and files. He worked by lamplight, his eyes straining as he etched the fine lines, the zodiac symbols, the numbers of the calendar. Each mark had to be precise, for a single error would spoil the harmony. He polished it until it gleamed. He folded the pieces together, tested the hinges, checked the needle of the compass. When it was finished, he held it in his palm and knew he had made something extraordinary. Not just an object, but a vessel of the cosmos. And then perhaps it passed into the hands of a wealthy patron, maybe a nobleman of Florence or a merchant of Venice. or even a scholar supported by a powerful family. It would be shown to guests with quiet pride, admired not only for its usefulness but for its elegance. It was a conversation piece, a marvel, a way of saying, "Here, in this small case, I carry the heavens themselves." The compendium reminds us that the Renaissance was not only about paintings and sculptures, it was about knowledge, about gathering the fragments of ancient wisdom from Greece and Rome and Arabia and weaving them together into something new. Astronomical instruments like this drew on centuries of tradition. The astrolabes of Islamic scholars, the calendars of medieval monks, the sundials of Roman engineers, all flowed into it, condensed and refined until they fit into the palm of a hand. And yet, though it was rooted in the past, it pointed toward the future. For only a few decades after 1550, the telescope would be born. Galileo, looking through his lens at the moons of Jupiter, would challenge everything men thought they knew. But even before that, the compendium whispered the same truth. The universe is not chaos. It is pattern. It is rhythm. It can be read, like a book, if one only has the patience. As you listen now, let your mind drift over its dials. See the tiny sun traced across its surface. See the moon, engraved in its phases. See the compass needle trembling as if alive. Each detail holds a story. Each line is a path across the heavens. In its quiet way, it is more than an instrument. It is a dream, frozen in brass. Imagine carrying it with you on a journey. You leave Florence, walking along dusty roads lined with cypress trees. The sun rises, casting long shadows across the Tuscan hills. You stop, unfold the compendium, set its sundial upright. The shadow falls, telling you the hour. You check the compass, pointing the way north. You trace the zodiac signs, remembering the season, the month, the stars that rise tonight. Then you fold it closed, slip it back into your cloak, and continue on. In that moment, you are not only a traveler on a road, you are part of something vast. The same patterns the ancients saw, the same sky that will stretch above generations yet unborn. The astronomical compendium of 1550 is rare, precious. Only a handful survive. Kept now in museums, their brass still gleaming after nearly 5 centuries. Visitors look at them behind glass, marveling at their detail, their beauty. Few today would know how to use them fully, yet their mystery endures. They remind us that science can be beautiful, that knowledge can be art, that the search for understanding can be carried in the palm of a hand. So as you rest now, think of that small shining object. Think of the hands that made it, the minds that used it, the skies it measured, the journeys it guided. Think of the quiet nights in Renaissance Italy, when candles burned low, when scholars bent over their desks, when merchants set out on long voyages, when poets looked up at the stars and dreamed. The compendium was there among them, silent, steady, a little universe folded into brass. And perhaps, as you drift toward sleep, you carry your own compendium, not of metal, but of memory, the patterns you trace in your life, the rhythms you follow, the beauty you hold quietly within. Like the instrument, these are small, but they endure. They are your own cosmos, your own map of meaning, waiting to be unfolded in the stillness of the night. Rest then in that thought. The stars wheel overhead, as they always have. The heavens remain vast, but within you too lies a compendium of wonder. Close your eyes, let the brass panels fold shut. Let the candle burn low, and sleep, as the universe moves gently, patiently, forever above you. The carbonized bread of Pompeii and Herculaneum, ancient loaves preserved by Vesuvius. The city was quiet in the early morning of that fateful August day. The sun rose gently over the Bay of Naples, its light falling across tiled rooftops, courtyards, and gardens heavy with figs and olives. In Pompeii and in nearby Herculaneum, life was already stirring. Bakers lit their ovens, the glow of fire flickering against walls blackened from years of smoke. The air smelled faintly of yeast and grain. In shops and homes, people prepared for another day, unaware that by nightfall their world would vanish beneath fire and ash. It is strange sometimes what survives the end of a city. Walls collapse, roofs burn, voices fall silent. Yet here, in Pompeii and Herculaneum, something as simple as bread endured. Loaves left in ovens, frozen in time, not by chance but by catastrophe. Carbonized by the heat of Mount Vesuvius, preserved for nearly 2,000 years. Today those loaves sit in museum cases, dark, round, divided into wedges by careful cuts, as if waiting for someone to reach out and tear a piece free. They whisper not of emperors or generals, but of the most ordinary, most essential act of daily life, the breaking of bread. Close your eyes and imagine standing in a Pompeian bakery. The walls are made of stone, rough and solid, warmed by the heat of the great oven. The floor is scattered with flour, fine dust rising with each step. In the center stands the millstone, tall and heavy, shaped like an hourglass. Donkeys or slaves walk in circles around it, pushing the wooden beam, turning the stone that crushes grain into flour. The air hums with the rhythm of their labor. the scraping of stone on stone, the soft thud of footsteps on the worn floor. Nearby, a baker kneads dough. His hands are strong, practiced, pressing and folding again. The dough is sticky, elastic, alive beneath his touch. He sprinkles flour, adds water, adds salt. Perhaps he adds a splash of sour wine, as some Roman recipes suggest, to give the bread its distinct flavor. The smell is faint at first, earthy and yeasty, but soon it will swell into the warm, comforting aroma we know so well. The oven glows, its fire built high, the walls radiating heat. The baker waits, judging the temperature not with a thermometer, but with his eyes, his hands, his years of experience. Too hot, and the loaves will burn. Too cool, and they will remain raw inside. He knows the balance. He has done this every day, feeding not only his own household but the citizens of the city. For bread is more than food here, it is sustenance, life itself. Now picture the loaves as they were made. Round, flat, shaped into discs, scored across the top into 8 sections, almost like a cake, so that each piece could be broken off easily. Some were stamped with seals, marks pressed into the dough before baking, declaring the bakery, the owner, sometimes even the household to which the bread was destined. For bread in Pompeii was not only baked fresh for the market, it was delivered to homes just as milk or newspapers might be delivered in later centuries. Each loaf carried identity, proof of its source. The loaves we know today, the carbonized ones, were baked that morning. They had risen, browned, been pulled from the oven, stacked in baskets, ready to be eaten. But then the mountain erupted. First came the cloud, vast and terrible, rising like a pine tree into the sky, casting ash across the city. Then the stones rained down, pumice falling in a hailstorm that cracked roofs and battered streets. People fled, some carrying belongings, others seeking shelter. And in the bakeries, the fires were left untended, the ovens still warm, the loaves still waiting. Hours later, the pyroclastic surges arrived, waves of superheated gas and ash, hotter than any oven flame. In an instant, the bread was transformed, not burned to ash, not crumbled to dust, but carbonized, sealed in black, hardened, preserved. What should have vanished in smoke became instead a time capsule, an everyday miracle. 2 millennia later, archaeologists uncovered them. Imagine the moment, digging through layers of pumice, brushing away ash, and then suddenly, the shape of a loaf, round, divided into 8, charred black, yet unmistakable. A Roman bread, untouched since that day. They lifted it gently, marveling at its weight, its texture. It was fragile, yet it endured. It was not gold, not silver, not marble, but it was something far rarer, a direct taste of daily life. The loaves of Pompeii and Herculaneum teach us more than recipes. They tell us how Romans lived, how they ate, how their society worked. Bakers were essential, their shops scattered throughout the cities. In Pompeii alone, archaeologists have found more than 30 bakeries, each with its millstones, its ovens, its storerooms of flour, and baskets of bread. Bread was sold on the streets, delivered to villas, eaten by rich and poor alike. Some loaves were made of fine white flour, reserved for the wealthy. Others were coarse, filled with bran, eaten by the working classes. Some were mixed with nuts or herbs, flavored with fennel or poppy seeds. Each carried the rhythm of Roman life, as essential then as rice in Asia or maize in the Americas. The carbonized loaves also remind us of fragility. For all the strength of Rome, for all the power of its legions, for all the wealth of its citizens, life could vanish in an instant. A baker who rose that morning, lit his oven, and prepared his loaves could not know that he would never see them eaten. His bread survived, but he did not. There is something haunting in that what remains is not the man, but the thing he made. The object endures, whispering for him when his own voice is gone. Now imagine yourself holding one of those loaves today. You are in a museum, perhaps in Naples, standing before a glass case. Inside lies the bread, dark, fragile, divided into 8 neat wedges. Its edges are cracked, its surface rough, but it is still whole, still a loaf. You lean closer, your breath fogging the glass, and you realize you are looking at the same bread that once sat on a Pompeian table. Bread that never fed its people, but feeds us now with memory. It is humbling, it is beautiful, it is strangely comforting. The bakers of Pompeii are silent now, but their work lingers. Archaeologists have even recreated their recipes, using analysis of the carbonized loaves to learn what grains they contained. Barley, spelt, millet, and wheat, ground together, mixed with water and salt, perhaps leavened with sourdough starter, as bakers still do today. Modern chefs have baked them anew, pulling warm loaves from ovens, golden and fragrant, offering a taste of Rome itself. To bite into such bread is to connect with those long gone, to share in their daily ritual, to honor their memory. But beyond the taste, beyond the archaeology, there is something softer here, something suited for sleep, the thought that in a world so fragile, so fleeting, the simplest things endure, a loaf of bread, the warmth of an oven, the scent of grain and yeast, the act of breaking food together. These are constants. They stretch across centuries. They outlast fire and ash. They remain, waiting quietly in the dark, until someone finds them and remembers. So rest now, with that image in mind. The streets of Pompeii are empty, the ovens cold, the loaves still waiting. The mountain has long since fallen silent, its fury spent, its slopes now green with vineyards. But the bread remains, dark and unbroken, a gift from the past. Let its quiet endurance carry you gently into sleep, for just as those loaves were preserved, so too are your moments, your days, your life. Nothing truly vanishes. It lingers, softly, in ways unseen. Close your eyes, and drift with that thought, as steady and timeless as the bread of Pompeii. The oldest bead of the Americas, ancient discovery near Douglas. The story begins not with a shout, nor with a discovery marked by trumpets, but with the quiet sound of wind. The kind of wind that drifts over the desert plains of what we now call Arizona, brushing against low hills, whispering across valleys, and tugging at tufts of mesquite and dry grass. In this place, near the small town of Douglas, time moves slowly. It is here that the earth once yielded something so small, so unassuming, that it might have been overlooked by any hurried passerby. Yet it was not a stone, nor a shell, nor a fragment of pottery. It was something older, something touched by human hands thousands upon thousands of years ago. A bead. A tiny bead, smoothed and worn, yet enduring. A bead so old that it reaches back into the early days of human settlement on the continent. Back to a time when the desert was not the desert we know, but a land alive with streams, animals, and wandering groups of people just learning to leave their mark on the world. This bead, discovered near Douglas, has become known as the oldest bead of the Americas, but its true story is not about its age alone, it is about the people who made it, the world they lived in, and the way something so small can carry the weight of entire lives across millennia. Imagine for a moment that you stand in the Sonoran Desert at dusk. The sky, painted with streaks of rose and violet, fades slowly into a darkness that reveals the first cold stars. Far to the south, the jagged ridges of the Sierra Madre shimmer in the dim light, their outlines sharp against the fading sky. The air is warm but cooling, and beneath your feet, the ground is dry and powdery, but dotted here and there with the bones of ancient rivers that once carved their way through this land. Long ago, more than 10,000 years ago, this land looked different. Springs bubbled from the earth, streams carried water across the plains, and the people who lived here followed the rhythms of water and animals, carrying with them not only their tools, but their stories, their rituals, and their art. It was in this land, among these people, that the bead was created. When archaeologists unearthed it, they held it delicately, as one holds a fragile secret. It was not large, no more than the length of a fingertip. Its edges were worn smooth, suggesting it had been touched, turned, perhaps strung on a cord, and worn against skin. It was not decoration for its own sake. It was a symbol, a talisman, a connection between one person and another. Beads, after all, are among humanity's oldest treasures. Long before we carved stone temples or built great cities, we shaped beads. From bone, from shell, from ivory, from seeds. They were worn as adornment, but also carried meaning, markers of identity, status, memory. The people who made this bead near Douglas were not simply surviving, they were expressing something deeply human. Let us follow them in imagination. A group of hunters returns from the plains, carrying the meat of a great animal, perhaps a bison or an antelope. The fire burns low as women and children gather around, preparing the meal. Beside the fire, an elder sits with tools of stone, shaping something smaller, something delicate. A fragment of shell or stone, chosen carefully, is chipped, drilled, polished. Bit by bit the bead takes form. Perhaps it is for a child, perhaps it is for the hunter who made the kill, perhaps it is for a burial, to accompany someone into the next world. In any case, the bead carries with it hours of patient work and the quiet weight of intention. To us today it seems fragile, a single bead, but to the people who lived then, it was as meaningful as a crown or a monument might be in another time. It was proof of connection, proof of creativity, proof that even in the earliest days of human presence in the Americas, people cared for more than the bare necessities of life. They sought beauty, they sought meaning, and they found it in something small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. The discovery near Douglas reminds us of just how long people have lived upon this land. For generations, the desert has seemed timeless, as though its stones and sands were older than memory. But beneath the ground, fragments like this bead speak. They tell us that the people who walked here tens of thousands of years ago were not so different from us. They loved, they mourned, they celebrated, and they made things that endured. Archaeologists study the bead with precision, examining its surface, its drill marks, its wear. But to hold it is to feel more than science, it is to feel presence. A presence stretching back across an unfathomable gulf of time. Beads have always held power in human history. In ancient Africa, shell beads carried meaning across tribes. In Europe, amber beads from the Baltic traveled thousands of miles in trade. In the Americas, beads shaped from turquoise, from bone, from seeds, became emblems of culture and belief. This small bead near Douglas connects to that same universal impulse, to hold something small that carries something great. Now picture, once more, the desert night. A campfire flickers, shadows dance against the stones, and somewhere among them, a child wears the bead around their neck, fingers it absently, feels its cool smoothness against their skin. They do not know that thousands of years later, others will find it, will wonder at it, will see in it a glimpse of their life. To them it is simply beautiful, simply theirs. Over centuries, the bead lay buried. The people who made it moved on, their fires extinguished, their stories scattered into the wind. The land changed, drying, warming, reshaping itself into the desert we know. And yet beneath the soil, the bead endured. It waited, quietly, for the day it would be uncovered. And when it was, the world paused to listen to the silence of ages carried in a single artifact, to listen to the smallness and greatness of what it means to be human. The bead tells us that art and adornment are not luxuries of civilization, but threads woven into humanity from the very beginning. It tells us that long before cities, long before pyramids, long before even the stories we think of as ancient, there were people who sat down with tools in their hands and shaped something beautiful from the raw material of the earth. The oldest bead of the Americas carries not only history, but a reminder that even in the quietest corners of time, beauty endures, that even in the harshest landscapes, people leave behind whispers of themselves, that even across 10,000 years, we are not alone. And so, as the wind still moves across the desert plains of Arizona, as night settles and the stars burn cold and eternal above the hills, that bead still speaks. It speaks of hands that shaped it. It speaks of eyes that admired it. It speaks of a life lived long ago, a life not so different from yours. And as you imagine it, small, delicate, enduring, you can let yourself drift into the same timelessness. The endless quiet of the desert, the eternal rhythm of wind and fire, the gentle presence of something made to be held, to be worn, to be remembered. A bead, the oldest bead of the Americas, and through it, the story of us all. The mermaid mummy that shouldn't exist. The story begins quietly, as it often does, with a tale whispered in candlelit rooms, passed along by travelers who swore they had seen it with their own eyes. Somewhere in Japan, cradled within the wooden walls of a small temple, rests a mummy that defies reason. Neither entirely human, nor entirely fish, it seems to embody the old legends of mermaids, the ningyo of Japanese lore. For centuries, villagers, pilgrims, and even scholars would pause before its shrine, gazing into its shriveled face, its webbed fingers, its skeletal ribs, as if it held within it a story older than the sea itself. To understand this mummy is to drift slowly through time, through the gentle tides of Japan's folklore, through the lives of those who crafted stories out of waves and storms. It requires us to step carefully, not with the speed of a historian rifling through records, but with the patience of a dreamer wandering down a lantern-lit path. So let us settle in, calm and unhurried, and trace the quiet story of the mermaid mummy that should not exist, yet does. Long before this mummy was ever displayed, Japan's coastlines were alive with tales of the sea. Fishermen knew that the ocean was a place of both bounty and peril. A calm morning might bring nets heavy with silver fish, but by nightfall, a storm could rise without warning, swallowing boats and lives alike. Out of this tension between plenty and danger emerged the ningyo, a creature unlike the Western mermaid of flowing hair and siren song. The Japanese ningyo was often described as a fish with a human face, sometimes grotesque, sometimes eerily beautiful. To eat its flesh, stories said, was to gain extraordinary longevity, perhaps even immortality, yet catching one was an omen of disaster, a curse upon the nets and the village. It is within this world of trembling respect for the sea that the mermaid mummy appears. The one most often spoken of is said to have come from the early 18th century during Japan's Edo period. Some accounts claim that fishermen off the coast of Tosa, present-day Kochi Prefecture, hauled in a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. Others suggest it was no accident of the net, but a deliberate creation by skillful artisans and priests, perhaps intended as a relic to awe the faithful. However it came to be, the mummy found its way into the quiet custody of temples, where it rested behind glass and wooden frames, visited not only by villagers but by travelers and eventually by foreign observers. Imagine standing before it. The body is small, no longer than half a meter. Its skin is dark, shrunken by time. The torso bears ribs like a human's, but its lower half trails into a tail, thin and stiff like that of a fish dried under the sun. The hands, if one dares to call them that, bear thin, skeletal fingers, webbed slightly as though meant for water. And the face is where belief falters. The mouth seems caught in a grimace, with tiny teeth peeking from desiccated gums. The sockets are deep, the nose flat. Some have sworn the expression looks like pain, others like warning. Priests tended to such relics with reverence. They did not insist upon its authenticity, nor deny it. The mermaid mummy was a reminder of the sea's mysteries, a symbol of the boundary between worlds. In certain temples, it was even said to offer protection from illness or misfortune. People would bow quietly, offer coins, and walk away murmuring prayers. Whether they believed the creature had once swum in the ocean, or whether they thought it an elaborate craft of bone and skin, it did not matter. What mattered was its presence, the way it stilled the heart and conjured wonder. Of course, over time, scholars grew curious. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Japan had opened itself to new sciences and foreign visitors, the mummy began to attract the attention of researchers. Some speculated it was a taxidermy creation, stitched together from the upper half of a monkey and the tail of a fish. This was not unheard of. Across Asia, so-called Fiji mermaids had long circulated as curiosities, often displayed in traveling shows to shock audiences. Many were fakes, created by skillful hands to inspire fear and awe. And yet the Japanese mummy carried with it a dignity that carnival attractions did not. It was not flaunted for amusement, but enshrined for contemplation, giving it an aura beyond deception. Even so, tests in modern times, where they have been permitted, tend to suggest construction. X-rays show bones that belong to different species joined together, perhaps wrapped in paper and cloth, then lacquered to preserve the form. It may not be the remains of a living creature, but the remains of a human need, the need to embody stories, to give form to the unseen. And in that sense, the mummy remains real, though not in the way it first seems. As we linger on this story, it is worth imagining the artisans who may have created it. Picture a small workshop in the Edo period, where skilled hands stitched the impossible. They may have begun with a monkey's upper body, carefully stripping and reshaping it. To this they attached the tail of a fish, perhaps carp or mackerel, binding them with threads that would later be hidden beneath layers of papier-mâché. Resin or lacquer would harden the surface, darkening the skin until it resembled something aged and uncanny. Was the artisan driven by faith, crafting an offering for a temple? Or was it profit, fashioning a relic that could draw pilgrims and their donations? Perhaps both motives danced together, as they often do. The villagers who first encountered it might have stood in silence, unsure whether to laugh, tremble, or bow. For them the sea's mysteries were not theoretical. Every life depended upon those waters. To hold in their presence a being that straddled sea and land must have felt like a delicate brush with fate itself. Children may have peered up with wide eyes, their imaginations filling in the cracks. Elders may have nodded knowingly, recalling stories of the Ningyo told by their grandparents. Over centuries, the mummy slept in its shrine, dust gathered, paintings faded around it, and still, it lay there, half human, half fish, a patient riddle. Foreign travelers who saw it sometimes scoffed, sometimes scribbled notes in journals. The West often demanded proof in the form of measurements and dissections, but in Japan, reverence was proof enough. To see it was to be reminded that the world did not yield all its truth so easily. Legends of Ningyo persist in Japan even today. One of the most famous tells of Yaobokuni, a woman who accidentally ate the flesh of a mermaid and lived for centuries, wandering from village to village, unable to die. In her endless life, she watched generations bloom and fade, until she at last sought solace in a monastery. The tale speaks not just of immortality, but of the sorrow that comes with it. And in the mermaid mummy, one can almost see her reflected, a being trapped between two states, neither living nor gone, preserved beyond its time. Modern science has tried to classify, to explain, to debunk. Yet the more one looks, the more the mummy resists being reduced to a specimen. Its true power lies not in what it is, but in what it evokes. To stand before it is to feel the sea's breath against one's skin, to hear the waves carrying whispers of lives long vanished. Even now, in certain temples and museums, the mummy is carefully guarded. Visitors step softly into the wooden rooms, their footsteps muted against tatami mats. The air smells faintly of incense. Behind the glass, lit by dim lamps, the figure rests as it has for centuries. Some lean close, trying to parse the line between monkey and fish, between myth and craft. Others stand back, unwilling to disturb the hush. For each person, the encounter is different, yet each leaves with the same question lingering. What if the mermaid mummy should not exist? And yet it does, embodying centuries of belief, fear, craft, and reverence. It asks us to slow down, to sit with mystery, to remember that not every story must be solved. Some are meant to be carried, like seashells found on a quiet shore, listened to in the silence of night. And so the tale of the mermaid mummy drifts onward, like a current beneath the waves. Whether made by human hands or born of something stranger, it remains, a bridge between worlds, a reminder that wonder still lingers in the most unexpected corners of the earth. The frozen mummies of Zelani Yar. Imagine for a moment, drifting far away from the warmth and busyness of the modern world, to a land where the air is crisp, sharp, and endlessly cold. A place where snow drapes the earth in quiet layers, muffling all sound but the faint whistle of the wind. This is the Russian Arctic, a land so vast, so untouched, that it feels as though time itself has been sealed beneath the ice. And hidden there, under centuries of frozen earth, lie figures from a forgotten world, mummified bodies whose presence offers us a glimpse into the lives, beliefs, and mysteries of an ancient people. These are the frozen mummies of Zelený Yar. The name itself, Zelený Yar, rolls gently like a whisper across the tundra. It means green ravine, though in truth, much of the year it is a place where whiteness dominates, snow and frost painting every surface. It was here, near the Ob River, that archaeologists stumbled upon something extraordinary. Burials dating back nearly 1,000 years, and in some cases even older. Within shallow graves, wrapped in birch bark and copper plates, the frozen remains of men, women, and children emerged, faces preserved by chance and by climate, staring across centuries. The first time you picture these discoveries, it might feel eerie. The idea of people, whole and intact, lifted out of the permafrost, their skins still bearing traces of tattoos, their clothing stitched with fragments of metal. Yet the longer you think about them, the more a kind of hush settles in. A quiet respect for those who once walked the same earth, braved the same biting winds, and then through ritual and tradition became guardians of stories we still cannot fully tell. The Zelený Yar mummies are unlike the golden-wrapped royals of Egypt, or the highland children sacrificed to the Inca gods in the Andes. These mummies were not preserved by human hands seeking eternity, but by accident, by the frozen soil itself. Their preservation is imperfect, patchy, yet hauntingly beautiful. Faces half visible, limbs darkened by copper's slow embrace, garments torn yet still recognizable. Each one is a puzzle, asking quietly to be understood. When researchers first lifted them from the frozen ground, they were struck by the careful attention given to burial. Bodies were wrapped in furs, birch bark, and sometimes placed beneath shields of copper. Children were treated with as much reverence as elders. And perhaps most curious of all, many of the mummies were laid to rest with their heads pointing to the north, their feet to the south. Some had masks of copper covering their faces, giving them an almost otherworldly presence. The copper may have been chosen for its protective qualities, a material believed to guard the spirit or prevent evil from touching the body. It is here that the mind begins to wander, drifting through the stillness of the Arctic night. What did these people believe about life and death? Did they imagine the soul traveling through the northern lights, dancing like ribbons across the sky? Did they think copper could bridge the world between the living and the dead? Or was it simply a practical act, knowing that copper slowed decay, keeping loved ones preserved a little longer in the unforgiving climate? The answers slip away like snowflakes on the tongue, fleeting, delicate. What remains is atmosphere, a sense of reverence that still lingers in the soil itself. As excavations continued, archaeologists found not only mummies but fragments of everyday life, wooden utensils, fragments of fur-lined clothing, metal adornments, crafted from bronze and silver. Each of these objects, though small, was stitched into the larger fabric of life in the Arctic. They told of a people skilled in hunting, in fishing, in crafting tools, sturdy enough to survive in a place where winter stretched endlessly and warmth was scarce. Imagine them along the Ob River centuries ago. The crack of ice breaking in spring, the calls of migratory birds returning after months of silence, smoke rising from hearths where families gathered close, huddled together for warmth, the texture of fur garments pulled tightly against the skin, the bite of cold air softened by laughter or song. It was in these moments of ordinary life that the extraordinary unfolded, and when life ended, ritual carried them into the earth. The mummies of Zelený Yar were not buried alone. Some were placed beside tools, knives, pendants, and even small wooden figurines. Perhaps these were companions for the journey beyond, objects meant to comfort the soul in unknown realms. A child might be laid to rest with a carved toy, a hunter with his knife. These quiet gestures linger across centuries, whispering that grief and love are as old as humanity itself. Among the most fascinating details is the roll of copper. Sheets of it were carefully laid over the chests, faces, and feet of the deceased. Over time, the copper oxidized, staining the skin greenish-brown, preserving parts of the body while leaving others untouched. This unintentional mummification created figures that seemed suspended between two worlds, half human, half metal. They looked neither fully alive nor entirely gone, but held in a state of timelessness. In this frozen silence, archaeologists pieced together a story of connections. The Zelený Yar people were not isolated. They belonged to a network stretching across the Arctic and beyond. Copper came from distant places, traded or carried along winding rivers. The techniques of burial bore similarities to other northern cultures, suggesting shared beliefs, or at least shared fears. The frozen tundra may feel like the edge of the world, yet it was a crossroads too. And so, lying there beneath centuries of ice, the mummies waited, unknowingly bridging past and present. Each time a body emerged, wrapped in birch bark, darkened by age, the silence deepened, not because of fear, but because of awe. The more closely we look, the more mysteries arise. Why were almost all of the mummies male? Why were women and girls buried differently, often with less ceremony, or not preserved at all? Was this a reflection of social structure, or of spiritual beliefs about gender and the afterlife? No answer feels certain. It is as though the mummies themselves choose what we may know, keeping their deepest truths hidden, like voices speaking only in whispers we can almost but not quite catch. As the Arctic wind moves across the land, it is easy to imagine those whispers carried into the present. A hunter telling his son stories of ancestors who walked among stars, a mother braiding her child's hair by the flicker of firelight, elders reminding the community of rituals that kept the living tied to the dead. These memories, though unwritten, survive in the silence of the graves. There is also a haunting tenderness in the way children were buried. Small forms wrapped carefully, copper plates laid gently across fragile bodies. Some were given pendants, others, tiny carvings. The care speaks of sorrow, of love, of hope that even in death, the youngest would not be abandoned. In that cold soil, grief lingers still, unchanged by time. And what of their faces? Some are featureless, blurred by time and copper. Others remain so vivid that archaeologists describe the curve of a cheek, the line of a jaw. These faces are reminders that history is not abstract, it is human. Every preserved wrinkle, every strand of hair, belonged to someone who laughed, who feared, who dreamed. The Zeleny Yar site is not large, but it holds immense weight. Each burial is like a page in a book that has no beginning and no end. We read fragments, never the whole. We guess, we imagine, we wonder. Perhaps that is fitting, for the Arctic itself is a land of half-seen truths, auroras that vanish in a blink, rivers that disappear beneath ice, horizons blurred by snow. Archaeologists continue to work slowly, carefully, respecting not just the bodies but the descendants who may still feel their presence. The Khanty people, indigenous to the region, sometimes view the burials with unease, believing they are tied to spirits better left undisturbed. In their worldview, these mummies are not artifacts, but beings caught between worlds, deserving reverence. This perspective adds yet another layer of mystery, reminding us that science is not the only lens through which to see the past. And so, as the snow drifts endlessly across the dew, frozen mummies remain both silent and eloquent. They are silent because they do not speak, do not move, and yet, eloquent in what they reveal. The resilience of Arctic life, the universality of grief and love, the complexity of human belief in the face of death. Picture the sight at dusk, when the last rays of sun skim across the snow and copper-stained figures rest in the dim light. The wind hushes, the sky deepens to indigo, and above, the aurora borealis begins its dance. Green ribbons shimmer, bending and twisting, as though carrying messages between earth and sky. Perhaps once, 1,000 years ago, those buried in Zeleny Yar watched these same lights, believing they were paths for souls, guides across the heavens. And now, preserved by earth and copper, they remain eternal watchers of that glowing sky. Time flows on, yet the mummies endure, part of the land, part of its memory, part of a story still unfolding. The telephone that spoke across time. It begins with a whisper carried through the dust of centuries, not the kind of whisper made by a human voice, but something more delicate, more elusive, almost as though the past itself leaned forward, cupping its hand to your ear, waiting for you to listen. In the dry earth of northern Peru, where the desert sands stretch wide and ancient ruins dot the horizon, archaeologists uncovered something that seemed almost impossible, a device. 2 pieces of gourd, connected by a length of cotton cord, so fragile that to breathe too heavily near it felt like it might crumble. It was simple in appearance but profound in implication. What they held in their hands was, in essence, a telephone. Not an electronic one, of course, not a Victorian contraption of wires and bells, nor a sleek modern device of glass and circuitry, but a voice-carrying instrument, thousands of years old, and it seemed to murmur one truth, soft but undeniable. Human beings have always been reaching for one another across the spaces that separate us. Tonight, let us journey into the hush of ancient Peru, into the settlements and ceremonial centers of the Chimu people, into the workshops where skilled hands shaped gourds into instruments, and into the silence of ruined chambers where voices may once have traveled across a taut cord, slipping through the air as if to cheat the limits of time itself. And as we wander together, slowly, without hurry, through deserts and temples, through kitchens and marketplaces, let the story drift and stretch until it feels less like history and more like a dream you are stepping inside of, calmly, gently, as the world of today folds away behind you. The object in question was unearthed in the 20th century, though its age stretched back far further. Archaeologists discovered it at Chan Chan, the great adobe city built by the Chimu culture before the Incas came. This was no small village. Chan Chan was vast, a sprawling labyrinth of palaces, courtyards, storerooms, and ceremonial spaces. Even now, walking through its ruins feels like entering a maze, the high mud brick walls blocking your view, forcing you to turn corners, to feel the sun shift as you navigate its mysterious corridors. It was here, in this city of walls, that the telephone was found. Two gourd resonators, carefully hollowed and smoothed, their ends sealed with membranes of stretched hide, a cord, cotton, twisted and strong in its day, threading between them. It looked like a toy at first glance, yet the craftsmanship betrayed something more. Intention, precision, the quiet curiosity of people who wanted sound to travel farther than the air might naturally allow. One can imagine the hands that shaped it, perhaps a craftsman seated cross-legged in a shaded corner of the city, working with a knife of bone or copper, scraping and polishing until the gourds were smooth. Perhaps his children watched, wide-eyed, as he tested the tension of the membrane, then called softly into one end. Maybe a child held the other, listening, eyes widening at the miracle that the father's voice had traveled, carried through nothing more than a chord and a whisper of vibration. If you close your eyes, you might picture that child's face, a mixture of wonder and confusion, a look you might recognize, because it is the same look you see on a modern child's face the first time they speak into a tin can telephone, or even the first time they hold a modern phone to their ear and hear a voice that should be far away, speaking to them as though near. The miracle is the same, whether it is centuries ago in Peru, or today in your own world. A bridge across distance. Let us linger for a while in Chanchan, the city that once thrummed with life. The air is dry, so dry that voices crackle when spoken, and the desert sun is strong, reflecting off pale adobe walls. Imagine yourself walking here, barefoot on the packed earth, passing by narrow corridors that open into wide plazas. In one corner, artisans work copper into ornaments. In another, women sit with baskets, weaving textiles of brilliant color, reds pulled from cochineal dye, blues from indigo, yellows from native plants. Children run through the alleyways, their laughter bouncing off the high walls, filling the spaces where today only silence remains. At the heart of the city, the rulers and priests move with calm dignity. They oversee ceremonies, storehouses, the tribute that flows in from conquered valleys. The Chimu were master organizers, their empire stretching along the coast, drawing wealth from irrigation, fishing, and trade. And yet, in the quiet corners of this great city, there were experiments too. Someone, at some point, wondered, what if a voice could be carried farther than an arm's length? What if sound could travel through a line, invisible, yet undeniable? That curiosity took shape in gourds and cotton, in a fragile device that outlived the very empire that made it. The telephone of Chanchan was never meant for mass communication. It was delicate, too delicate. Its thin cord could not survive the roughness of daily use, nor the weather of the coast. It may have been used in a royal household, perhaps even in the palace, as a demonstration of wonder, a device for ceremony or teaching. It is possible, though we cannot know, that a priest might have used it, speaking into one end from behind a wall, while another listened on the other side. The effect would have been startling, magical, a disembodied voice, carried not by air but by an unseen thread. It would have felt, perhaps, like hearing the gods themselves. When archaeologists found the device, they were stunned. For years it was studied in quiet astonishment, carefully protected from decay. The gourds had darkened with age, the cord fragile as cobwebs. To hold it was to feel the thinness of time itself, the way a human hand could reach across centuries through the medium of a humble object. The telephone now rests in the collections of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. It is kept safe, shielded from the light, preserved so that future generations might marvel at it. Most visitors will never see it directly. It remains too fragile, too easily undone by the smallest disturbance, but it whispers all the same. Its story ripples outward, like sound traveling along a string, reminding us of what humans have always longed for: connection. Think of it this way. In every age, in every place, people have tried to find ways to stretch their voices farther. In caves, tens of thousands of years ago, people clapped and called, testing the echo, marveling at how stone carried sound. In ancient Greece, amphitheaters were shaped to let a single voice reach thousands. In medieval monasteries, bells were cast to let one call resonate across valleys. And in a Chimu city on the Peruvian coast, two gourds and a cotton cord carried one voice to another. It is humbling to realize that the urge was always there. The yearning to speak, to be heard, to connect, whether across a courtyard, a mountain, or an ocean of time. Now let the story drift slower, softer. Imagine the city of Chan Chan at dusk. The sun is lowering, painting the adobe walls in gold and shadow. Families gather around cooking fires, the smell of maize and roasted beans rising in the air. Fishermen return from the coast, their nets heavy with the catch of the day. Traders unload llama caravans, their bells jingling faintly. Somewhere in the palace, a quiet experiment takes place. A child holds one gourd to her ear. A father, or perhaps a priest, speaks softly into the other. The child gasps, then laughs, amazed to hear the voice traveling through a cord, as if the air itself had bent to their will. For that moment, across the taut thread, a bridge exists. A tiny miracle, long forgotten, rediscovered centuries later in dust and silence. And so, the telephone that spoke across time continues to do so, in its own way. Not through its cord, now long quiet, but through its story. Through the way it reminds us that human beings, no matter the age, are always searching for ways to reach each other. It is not only an artifact, it is a message. We have always wanted to speak across distance. We have always wanted to be heard, and that desire is as old as history itself. The statue that turned its back on the gods. Imagine walking into a ruined city long since abandoned. Its streets silent, its palaces collapsed, its gardens withered into dust. The stones that once bore the weight of kings now rest in fragments upon the earth. Yet, even in this silence, something immense remains. At the threshold of a vanished palace, a presence stands watch. It is not a simple carving, not a mere piece of ancient architecture, but something in between guardian and god, beast and man, rooted in myth, yet made of stone. It is the Lamassu, the statue with the head of a man, the wings of an eagle, and the body of a bull. For the people of Mesopotamia, it was not simply decoration, it was power made visible. To pass by it was to feel watched, measured, judged. To walk beneath its shadow was to step into a realm guarded by forces beyond human understanding. And among these guardians, one stood at Khorsabad, the Assyrian capital built by King Sargon II. Its wings spread wide, its gaze stern. And yet there is something unusual whispered about this statue, that it does not face outward toward the world, but inward, as if it had turned its back on the gods themselves. The Assyrian Empire of the 8th century BCE was a place of immense ambition. Cities rose not as quiet villages, but as fortresses of stone and brick, filled with reliefs of conquest, lines of soldiers, and palaces stretching in geometric symmetry. Sargon II, the king who ordered Khorsabad to be built, sought nothing less than a capital worthy of the heavens. It was a statement, a city that would outshine Nineveh and Dur-Sharrukin, a place where the throne of Assyria would seem immovable. And yet, it was also fragile. Every Assyrian king lived with the knowledge that empires, like men, are watched by gods who are not always kind. Victory in battle might mean divine favor, but a bad harvest, an omen in the sky, or a rebellion in the provinces could signal that the gods had turned their eyes away. Protection was never guaranteed, and so they called upon the Lamassu. To approach an Assyrian city gate was to feel a shift in atmosphere. From a distance you might see towers, walls, and the shimmer of heat upon the bricks. But as you drew close, your eyes would be drawn to the colossal forms, bulls with the faces of kings, wings arching above, beards carved in delicate curls, eyes unblinking. Each one weighed tons, yet was carved with exquisite detail. They stood not flat against the wall, but as if half emerging from stone, stepping into your path, alive and frozen at once. The Lamassu was not simply a statue, it was a threshold being. To the Assyrians, doorways were dangerous places, the points where one world touched another. The Lamassu was stationed there to stand guard. It was the protector of the liminal, the watcher of gates. And in Khorsabad, the Lamassu of Sargon's palace were among the grandest ever made. Yet the Lamassu we are speaking of tonight, the one said to have turned its back on the gods, is not remembered simply for its size or its artistry. It is remembered for the strangeness of its stance. Most Lamassu face outward, as if glaring at the approaching enemy, wings sweeping back, hooves planted firm. But this one, according to fragments of record and the impressions of later excavators, seemed oriented differently. Instead of watching the outer world, it turned inward, as though its eyes were cast not upon strangers or soldiers, but upon the palace itself. Why would such a guardian look inward? Was it a mistake of architecture, a shift in design, or was it deliberate, a choice meant to say something about the gods, the king, and the very nature of protection? Some have suggested that it was not a mistake at all, but a warning. A Lamassu turned inward might suggest that the threat was not from outside the gates, but from within them. That the palace itself held the seeds of danger, the betrayal of allies, the whispers of discontent. In this way the statue would not be guarding against foreign armies, but against the corruption of the king's own court. Others whisper something more unsettling, that the gods themselves had grown weary of Sargon's ambition. The city of Khorsabad, after all, was short-lived. No sooner was it built than it began to fall into disuse. Sargon II himself would die in battle, his body left behind on foreign soil, never returned for burial. For the Assyrians, this was a terrible omen, a sign that divine favor had abandoned the throne. Could it be that the Lamassu, in turning inward, reflected that turning away, that the gaze of heaven had shifted, leaving even the guardians powerless? To stand before such a statue today is to feel a strange mix of awe and unease. The Lamassu looms taller than any person, its human head crowned with a headdress, its beard carved in endless ringlets, each curl etched with precision. Its eagle wings stretch with layered feathers, each one individually shaped, as though the artist knew the exact way light would fall across stone. And yet, despite this beauty, its eyes are unblinking, its mouth unsmiling. It is serene, but not comforting, powerful, but not merciful. Imagine approaching such a being not as a modern visitor, but as a traveler from centuries ago. You are dusty from the road, weary from days of walking. You see the walls of Khorsabad ahead, shimmering in the sun, and then you see it, the guardian. Its hooves press against the earth as though it might move at any moment. Its wings catch the sunlight, casting shadows across the gate. You stop, you breathe slower, you realize you are being seen. For the Assyrians, this was the point. To pass beneath the gaze of the Lamassu was to acknowledge the might of the empire, the authority of the king, and the watchfulness of the gods. You could not help but bow, even if only slightly, as you stepped forward. The Lamassu also carried layers of symbolism. The bull's body meant strength, the capacity to trample enemies. The eagle's wings meant speed, the ability to move swiftly like the storm. The human face meant intelligence, the wisdom to rule and to judge. Combined, it was a being greater than any single creature could be, a composite of perfection. And yet, for all its perfection, the story of the Lamassu at Khorsabad carries a quiet irony. For though it was carved to last forever, its palace did not. The city fell into ruin, its stones buried beneath sand and time. When archaeologists uncovered the remains in the 19th century, they found Lamassu statues broken, their heads separated from their bodies, their wings shattered. Even the mighty guardians could not withstand the slow erosion of centuries. And perhaps that is the deeper story here. The statue that turned its back on the gods was not defying them, but reflecting the truth of empires. That power fades, walls crumble, and even the greatest kings are forgotten. The Lamassu's gaze turned inward might be a reminder that the greatest dangers often come not from the enemies outside, but from within the walls we believe will protect us. As the night deepens in our story, imagine yourself not among the bustling streets of Assyria, but walking quietly among ruins. The stars stretch overhead, the desert wind moves gently, and the fragments of stone guardians rest half-buried. You trace your hand across the carved feathers of a wing, cool beneath the moonlight. You look into the eyes of the Lamassu, eyes that have seen kingdoms rise and fall, gods worshipped and forgotten, men crowned and struck down. It does not speak, it does not move. And yet it communicates something all the same. That protection is fragile, that power is temporary. That even the mightiest empires, guarded by stone beings of impossible size, eventually turn to dust. And perhaps that is why, in the end, the Lamassu at Khorsabad seems to have turned its back on the gods, not out of defiance, but out of inevitability. For even gods turn their faces away, and statues cannot hold back the tide of time. The moon disk that shattered without touch. Beneath the quiet skies of northern Peru, where the winds sweep across dry valleys and the sands carry the faint echo of forgotten chants, there stands a place where time itself seems reluctant to move forward. It is a place of color, though the centuries have dimmed its brightness. It is a place of silence, though once it trembled with drums and voices. It is called Huayco de la Luna, the Temple of the Moon. The temple rises like a slumbering mountain of clay and brick, at the foot of the Cerro Blanco, the White Mountain. To the people who once lived here, the mountain was more than stone and earth. It was alive, breathing, watching, and waiting. The temple was its partner, its shadow, its mirror, a house not for men but for gods. And within the heart of this temple, archaeologists uncovered a mystery, a disc, shaped in honor of the moon, carved and painted with the careful hands of moche artisans 15 centuries ago. It was not a mere ornament but a sacred circle, a symbol of cycles, birth and death, water and drought, harvest and hunger. Yet the disc, once whole, was found shattered, not by hammer, not by hands, not even by the weight of centuries pressing down. It seemed to have cracked apart without touch, a fracture that defied explanation, as though the moon itself had sighed, and the disc splintered in response. Tonight, let us wander together through this story. Let us walk slowly across the sands of Trujillo, hear the distant ocean breaking against the shore, and step into the shadows of Huaca de la Luna. There we will follow the traces of the moche, and perhaps glimpse why the moon disk shattered in silence. The story begins with the moche, a people whose world was bound tightly to nature's moods. They lived not far from the Pacific, where the waters can turn suddenly warm and violent, a phenomenon we now call El Niño. To the Moche, these storms were not accidents of weather, but the breath of gods, fury released from the sky. Rain would rush across the land, swallowing fields, breaking houses, while drought would follow close behind. To survive, the Moche built carefully. Their temples were not of stone, but of adobe. Millions of sun-dried bricks stacked like offerings. Each brick carried a fingerprint, a mark pressed into wet clay before the sun hardened it. Step close enough and you can still see those fingerprints today, like whispers left behind by hands that vanished centuries ago. Huaca de la Luna was one of their sacred places, twin to the nearby Huaca del Sol, the Temple of the Sun. If the Sun Temple was the house of power, of kings and warriors, the Moon Temple was the house of rituals. It was here that blood was spilled, murals painted, and prayers offered to the forces that ruled their fragile world. Across its walls were painted deities with fanged mouths and staring eyes, figures half human, half animal, caught between worlds. Among them was the lunar being, a figure linked to the cycles of darkness and light, the tides of the ocean, the fertility of the earth. And at the temple's ceremonial core, a disk of the moon stood to catch the eyes of worshippers. The disk was more than a symbol, it was a center, a circle, without beginning or end. Its roundness mirrored the moon that waxed and waned in the skies above. Its colors glimmered red, white, and black, the hues of blood, bone, and shadow. And it was believed to hold balance, to remind those who looked upon it that every storm passes and every drought ends. But centuries later, when the temple was uncovered from beneath layers of sand and collapsed brick, the disk was found in pieces, perfectly broken, not crushed by rubble, not melted by water, not crumbled by age. The shards lay scattered but sharp, as though they had chosen to fall apart. Archaeologists puzzled at the sight, for there was no clear hand behind the destruction. Some whispered of an ancient ritual. Perhaps the disk had been shattered deliberately, a symbolic breaking of the moon's power at the temple's abandonment. Others spoke of the earth itself, tremors moving silently beneath the Andes, shaking with invisible force. Yet still others leaned into mystery, that the disk shattered, not from outside pressure, but from within, as though the symbol, tired of holding centuries of faith, had finally released itself. To walk through Huaca de la Luna today is to drift between echoes. Wide courtyards open into narrow passages, walls rise with faded murals, and the colors of ochre and white still cling stubbornly against time. Each layer of the temple was built upon the last, for the Moche did not destroy their sacred walls, they buried them. When a temple grew old, they filled its chambers with brick and sand, then built a new one above it, layer upon layer, like sediment of devotion. And so the moon disk too may have been entombed and revealed, entombed again, then forgotten until the archaeologist's hands brushed it free. Its breaking, unexplained, lies there like a whisper of something unfinished. Imagine for a moment, standing in the courtyard as a Moche priest once did. The air is heavy with incense, seashell trumpets echo across the walls, drums throb like heartbeats. Around you, murals gleam with painted figures, jaguar fangs curling into smiles, serpents twisting in endless coils. In the center, the moon disk shines in torchlight. Its surface seems alive, reflecting not only the glow of fire, but the faces of those who worship. You raise your eyes to it, and the circle gazes back. To you, it is more than clay or paint. It is the moon itself, present in this place, reminding you that the world is cycle, not line. And you bow your head, leaving an offering, perhaps a strand of hair, a bead, a sip of chicha beer. But centuries pass, the torches are gone, the murals fade, the sands press in, and when at last the disk is seen again, it lies in shards. Some say the shattering was a message. The Moche lived with dualities, life and death, sea and desert, feast and famine. The moon itself was dual, bright and dark, full and empty. Perhaps the disk had to break to remind us that balance comes not only from harmony, but from fracture. A circle can shatter, but its pieces still recall the whole. Others say it was nature, simple and unsentimental. Adobe cracks when the air grows too dry, or when tremors ripple across the valley. Yet the archaeologists who studied the pieces spoke of a strangeness in the breaks, a neatness almost intentional. The disk did not crumble, it split, clean, as if by choice. Standing in the temple, the air still, and the murals breathing faintly from their walls, you cannot help but wonder, did the moon itself reach down in one silent moment and touch its symbol here? Was the breaking a gesture, a reminder that nothing made by hands lasts forever, not even in the house of gods? The Huaca de la Luna endures. Tourists wander its paths. Archaeologists brush gently at murals, revealing faces that had not seen light in 1,000 years. And in the museum nearby, the broken disk rests in fragments, not restored, not forced back into a circle, but displayed in its silence. For perhaps that is the lesson, that wholeness is not always the truth, that sometimes the story lies in the break, in the way light shines between the pieces. And so the moon disk of the Moche speaks, not in perfection, but in fracture, Its shattering was not a failure, but a transformation. And as the moon itself still hangs above the Andes, waning and waxing as it always has, the disk rests below, broken, but eternal. The singing bones beneath the riverbed. The Narmada River has been flowing for so long that to speak of its age is to touch the edges of time itself. Long before the first stone was lifted into a temple, before the first script was carved into clay or etched into copper, the Narmada had already been carving its patient path through the ancient rocks of central India. It is one of the very few rivers in the subcontinent that flows not eastward into the Bay of Bengal, nor westward into the Arabian Sea, but west along its own stubborn course, threading through ridges and valleys, never yielding fully to the shapes of the land around it. People call it Ma Narmada, Mother Narmada, because for countless centuries it has been not just a river but a living, breathing force that has shaped kingdoms, inspired myths, and carried whispers between worlds. Yet within this sacred river's story lies a legend seldom told beyond the villages and ghats where its waters run deepest. In hushed voices, especially when the monsoon has swollen the river to a furious strength, some elders speak of the bones that sing beneath its bed. Not bones of fish, not bones of humans in the ordinary sense, but bones that belong to another order of existence, bones so ancient that the very rocks of the gorge seem to remember them. The Narmada Gorge itself is unlike most other valleys carved by rivers. It is said to be among the oldest exposed geological formations on Earth, a wound opened by time into the Indian Shield, its rocks dating back hundreds of millions of years. Here, the fossils of the past lie scattered like pages of a forgotten book. In the cliffs and beds of the gorge, scientists have uncovered the petrified remains of trees from primeval forests, and more astonishingly still, fragments of creatures that walked these lands before humanity ever dreamed of itself. In the 1980s, paleontologists unearthed what they believed to be the remains of some of the earliest dinosaurs in India, their bones hardened into stone, yet still recognizable as the skeletons of immense lizards that thundered across the Triassic landscape. More recent excavations revealed skull fragments of one of the oldest known hominins outside Africa, a being who walked here hundreds of thousands of years ago, gazing across the same river. It is against this backdrop of deep time that the story of the singing bones arises. For where scientists see strata and sediments, villagers sometimes hear voices. They say that when the river runs low and the wind sighs across the gorge, you can hear faint tones rising from the bedrock. Some describe it as a low humming, like a conch blown far away. Others claim it is sharper, like flutes carried on the current. And a few insist they have heard words, syllables of an ancient tongue that predates even Sanskrit, resonating as though the rocks themselves were trying to remember their first language. To walk along the gorge is to feel this layering of the natural and the mythical. Imagine standing there at dusk, the cliffs rising steep on either side, etched with colors of red and ochre, the river glinting with the last light of day, and the sound, not always audible but somehow sensed of something beneath, resonating with the slow rhythm of the water. It is no wonder that the place has attracted seekers, ascetics, and pilgrims for millennia. The Narmada has always held a special place in Indian cosmology. Unlike the Ganga or Yamuna, which are rivers of myth and of gods descending, the Narmada is spoken of as a river born from Shiva's own tears. In one story, he meditated so deeply that his body trembled, and from his eyes fell drops that became rivers. The Narmada, in particular, was said to have sprung from his right side, carrying his strength and his sorrow together. To this day, pilgrims undertake the Narmada Parikrama, a circumambulation of the entire river, walking along its banks for thousands of kilometers as an act of devotion. For them, every bend, every stone, every whisper of current carries sanctity. It is here that myth and science blur, because in truth, the Narmada Gorge does carry voices of the past, fossilized whispers of lives that ended millions of years ago. Fossils are nothing if not echoes, the hardened songs of bodies that once breathed, now preserved in stone. When villagers say the bones beneath the river sing, they may be recalling, in their own way, the ancient creatures that once roamed here, the titanic reptiles, the mammoths of the Pleistocene, the first humans whose hands chipped tools along its shores. Yet there are also stories that resist such neat reconciliation. One tale, told in a village near the gorge, speaks of a time when a great drought struck the land. Crops failed, cattle died, and the people despaired. The river still flowed, but its waters seemed thinner, weaker, as though the spirit of the Narmada herself had withdrawn. In their desperation, the villagers prayed at the riverbank, offering what little grain they had left. For days, nothing happened. Then, one night, a sound arose from the riverbed, a low, melodic thrum that none could explain. It was not the call of animals, nor the sighing of reeds, nor the rush of water. It was something deeper, like a chorus emerging from the very stones. The next morning, rain clouds gathered, and the drought was broken. From then on, the people said that the river's bones had sung them back to life. There are variations of this story. Some say the sound was the voice of ancestors, buried long ago in the earth. Others claim it was the dinosaurs themselves, whose souls had never left, rumbling through stone. And a few whisper of beings older still, guardians of the earth's first breaths, who rest within the rocks and awaken only when the land is in peril. To consider this legend is to understand something profound about human imagination. In a landscape so ancient, where fossils protrude from cliffs and stones carry patterns older than humanity itself, it is natural to sense that the earth is alive with memory. Science tells us that sound is vibration, that stone can resonate when struck or moved by water. Folklore takes this further. If stone can vibrate, perhaps it can also remember. If it can remember, perhaps it can sing. The gorge also holds real acoustics that might feed the legend. Travelers have noted that certain narrow stretches echo in uncanny ways. A shout or chant can linger far longer than expected, sometimes distorted by the curves of rock into tones that no human throat produced. Add to this the rumble of water and the whisper of wind, and one begins to understand how the idea of singing bones might arise, not as fantasy, but as a poetic truth drawn from lived experience. Still, the image of bones themselves, skeletons beneath the river, humming or chanting, carries a haunting power. It speaks to something universal, the sense that the dead do not fully depart, that they leave traces, fragments, resonances. Just as fossils or bodies turn to stone, myths or memories turn to stories. And perhaps in the Narmada, the two converge. Even today, archaeologists and paleontologists continue to explore the region. Each discovery adds another layer to the river's identity. The unearthing of early hominin remains, for instance, has forced scientists to reconsider migration patterns out of Africa, suggesting that human ancestors reached India far earlier than previously believed. In a way, those fragments, jawbones, teeth, skull shards, are themselves singing bones, pieces of us, calling out across hundreds of thousands of years to remind us where we came from. Meanwhile, the river flows on, as it always has. Pilgrims bathe in its waters, farmers draw sustenance from its banks, and children play along its ghats. At night, when the stars spread across the vast sky of Madhya Pradesh, the river glimmers with their reflection. And if you stand quietly, letting the world fall still, you might hear something faint, a tone, a hum, a murmur that cannot be traced to any bird or current. Perhaps it is only the mind filling silence with meaning. Or perhaps it is the river itself, carrying the music of its bones, reminding those who listen that time is far deeper than we ever imagined. The singing bones beneath the Narmada may never be proven, nor disproven. They exist in that liminal space between geology and mythology, between echo and imagination. But in that very ambiguity lies their power. For to believe in them is to acknowledge that the world is not yet fully explained, that beneath every riverbed and within every gorge there may lie stories waiting to be heard. And sometimes, if the night is quiet enough, those stories do not wait at all. They rise, in notes we cannot quite capture, like a song carried on the water, reminding us that the earth itself has a voice. And so the Narmada continues, bearing with it fossils, myths, and whispers. The gorge remains, vast and ancient, its rocks older than memory, its echoes older than speech. And somewhere beneath the flowing waters, whether in the imagination of villagers or in the vibrations of stone itself, the bones keep singing, their song woven into the endless current of time. The mask that smiled only in firelight. The desert has a way of holding its breath at night. Out across the wide Mesopotamian plain, where the rivers once sprawled and bent with silver in the moonlight, silence drapes itself over the earth like an ancient cloth. The stars shine with the same patterns that people once read as gods, and in the heart of what is now southern Iraq lies the ruin of Uruk, the old city, the place that lived before cities had names. It was here, long ago, in the dust and brick, that hands shaped a marble face, a face that would wait, forgotten for thousands of years until it would be lifted once more into the trembling light of the world. The Mask of Warka, they call it now, a name borrowed from the village that kept its watch nearby. But before it was a mask in a museum, before it was a fragment held up in photographs, it was a gaze in firelight, a smile meant for gods and worshippers, for supplicants who pressed their foreheads to temple stones, and whispered prayers that echoed into the shadowed ceilings. The mask is carved from marble, pale and cool even in the warmth of fire. It is one of the oldest naturalistic depictions of the human face, so old that its age is difficult to measure in ordinary terms of kings and reigns. 5th millennium years from the present, maybe 4,500 before Christ. It belongs to that stretch of time where the line between myth and history still blurred, where every act of carving was not only art but invocation. It is thought to be Inanna, the goddess who walked in both morning and evening, goddess of love and war, of harvest and storm, of fertility and death. Her temples rose like mountains of clay, and inside their dim chambers, firelight would lick the walls, flicker over offerings of grain and beer, gleam upon figurines and jewelry, and settle most of all upon the white marble face whose features held the air of divinity. The eyes of the mask are wide, hollow once, for they would have been inlaid with precious stone or shell, perhaps lapis, deep blue like the sky after rain, or bitumen, black as midnight rivers. The eyebrows were carved to arch delicately, the lips closed in composure, not smiling as mortals smile, but in that strange and timeless way that gods seem always to be just at the edge of expression, as though the face itself knew a secret, and the firelight was the only thing allowed to reveal it. The mask would have been attached to a wooden body, now long decayed, dressed in garments woven from wool, shimmering with beads. People would have approached her, placed food at her feet, whispered their petitions. Inanna was the one who held dominion over what mortals feared and desired most, and so her face glowed in the shifting light, her marble skin drinking fire until it looked alive. Imagine the room. Clay walls rise around you, plastered smooth, painted perhaps with ochre and charcoal patterns that now exist only in dust. The floor is cool under bare feet. Outside, the city murmurs with the sounds of livestock being led to pen, women grinding grain, men calling to one another as they haul reeds and timber. But inside, only the crackle of the flame, shadows climb the walls like living things. The scent of burning oil and bitumen hangs thick, mixing with the sharp tang of sheep fat offered in the flame. You stand in silence before the mask. Its gaze seems to notice you, though it does not move. You bow, and the world feels still. In this place, time itself is heavy, each moment stretched long, as though the mask is not simply a carving, but a doorway to something larger, older, beyond measure. The city of Uruk itself was immense for its age. Mud brick houses lined narrow alleys, walls soared high, and canals carried water from the Euphrates into the fields. Here was where writing itself first took form, the first tablets pressed with reeds to hold numbers and prayers and trades. It was the city of Gilgamesh, the legendary king who sought immortality and failed, leaving only his story behind. And somewhere within those streets, past ziggurats rising like layered steps toward heaven, inside temple courts where priestesses sang hymns at dawn, there was the mask, waiting, smiling in the light, holding silent vigil as centuries turned. Marble was rare in Mesopotamia. It had to be brought from far places, carried over river and land. That someone chose marble for this mask tells us its importance, that nothing less would do for the goddess. And though the carving seems simple to modern eyes, with its clean planes and absence of elaborate detail, it carries a weight of presence that no ornament could improve. In the hush of the temple, ornament was unnecessary. The firelight itself was her crown, the shadows her robe, the hollow eyes her mystery. It is said that firelight reveals things differently than day. The sun shows what is. Fire, by contrast, shows what might be. It flickers, it hides and reveals. It moves across faces until they seem to change expression in the dance of brightness and shadow. The mask of Worka, when it stood in the temple, may have smiled only then, when flames bent and leapt and touched the corners of her lips, turning the marble to warm skin, making her look as though she would answer. To the supplicant kneeling there, exhausted, desperate, or in awe, the mask would not have been a carving, it would have been alive. The people of Uruk knew this power. They built their world on it. Fire in the dark was more than warmth, it was a line between the human and the void. They set torches along their city walls to mark their dominion against the night. They lit lamps in shrines so the gods could see the offerings. They trusted flame to carry prayers upward, through smoke, and in that trust, the mask gained its life, an eternal face that came alive only in the glow of firelight, when stone breathed with warmth and divinity bent low. Now imagine centuries passing. The mask remains, silent, while generations live and die. Farmers kneel to her before planting. Lovers bring offerings of honey or oil, hoping for blessings. Warriors leave weapons, begging for victory. The mask listens, though she never speaks. Always the fire makes her smile. Always, the darkness surrounds her, and the city goes on. Until one day the temple crumbles, the roof falls, dust fills the chamber. Flames burn no more. The mask lies hidden, her smile extinguished, buried beneath earth and ruin. For thousands of years she lay in silence. The world changed above her. Empires rose and fell. Armies marched. Prophets spoke. New gods were worshipped. The rivers shifted course. Yet beneath it all, the mask waited. Then, in 1939, archaeologists uncovered her face again. Imagine the moment when the soil was brushed away and pale marble emerged, the hollow eyes staring once more into light. But this time, it was not firelight. It was the dry, clinical light of day, of discovery, of history. The mask was lifted, dusted, catalogued, placed in glass. Her firelight smile was gone, or rather, invisible. Without flame, her expression was different, solemn, still, frozen in time. She had become artifact rather than goddess. Yet even in the museum, People notice something. When the light shifts, when shadows fall across her features, there is a moment when the lips seem to soften, when the marble grows warm, when she looks as though she might breathe again. In those moments, perhaps, the old fire returns. The memory of flames still clings to her stone, and visitors who linger, who watch long enough, might feel that same hush descend, that same timeless weight, as though standing in the temple once more, as though Inanna herself gazes back. And so the mask rests now, guarded, admired, debated. Was it truly Inanna, or another goddess, or perhaps a mortal queen, given divine likeness? Scholars discuss, but the mask does not answer. She remains silent, the firelight gone, but her smile still waiting, as if to say that truth belongs not in words, but in the quiet space between shadow and flame. Time itself seems to move slower when we think of her. The world of Uruk drifts like a dream, mud brick walls glowing in the sunset, canals reflecting starlight, ziggurats towering against the sky. Priests chant, children laugh, women weave, and somewhere within the heart of the city, a face of marble gleams in the flickering glow, smiling only when the fire bends toward her, smiling only in the secret language of light. And so, as you drift further into this story, let the mask keep watch. Imagine the glow of flames across pale marble. Imagine the silence of the temple, the weight of centuries pressing gently down. Imagine the face that does not change, yet always seems about to. A face that smiled only in firelight, and still does, if you know how to see. The copper idol with empty eyes. The plains of northern Iraq are vast, stretching out beneath a sky that has been watching for millennia. The sun rises slowly over hills and valleys, glinting against the winding rivers that have nourished humanity since its first steps into civilization. Beneath this land, in soil pressed and shaped by generations, there lies a secret that survived floods, invasions, droughts, and the relentless erosion of time. It is the copper idol of Besetki, a figure whose hollow gaze holds the memory of kings and empires, whose silent presence whispers of a world long vanished. Its eyes are empty now, yet somehow they see more than stone, more than the modern museums that house it. They see across the centuries, waiting for those who might notice its quiet dominion. It was discovered in a humble excavation near the village of Besetki, close to the modern city of Duhok, nestled among rolling hills and ancient irrigation channels. The land itself seems to breathe history, as if it remembers every footstep of those who once walked here. In 1975, construction workers digging for a road stumbled upon a metallic glimmer in the soil. What first appeared to be a lump of scrap or corroded metal revealed itself, upon closer inspection, as a fragment of an extraordinary Bronze-era statue. The lower body of the figure was remarkably preserved, its legs sculpted with a grace and power that suggested the skill of a master artisan, while the upper body, torso, and head had long vanished. Yet even in its incomplete form, the statue carried an unmistakable aura of reverence and authority. Archaeologists soon realized that this was no ordinary figure. Cast in copper alloy, it bore an inscription in Akkadian cuneiform, linking it unmistakably to the reign of Naram-Sin, the grandson of Sargon of Akkad, one of the first rulers in history to claim divine status. Naram-Sin's empire stretched across Mesopotamia, uniting city-states under a banner of conquest and administration, his name written into the annals of history with pride and awe. And yet, here was an object, small yet imposing, that transcended human ambition. It was crafted not just to commemorate, but to assert, to proclaim, and perhaps to guard. The idol is remarkable in its composition. Unlike stone, which absorbs time slowly and silently, bronze and copper carry with them a subtle warmth, a residue of fire and craftsmanship. To cast such a figure required immense skill. The metal workers would have melted copper and tin over roaring flames, tended their bellows with precision, and poured the molten alloy into molds that had been carved with deliberate care. Once cooled, the figure emerged, cool to the touch, yet imbued with the memory of fire, holding a latent energy within its alloyed body. The hollow eyes of the idol are the first thing that strikes a modern observer. They were not always empty. Likely, they had been fitted with stones, shells, or other precious materials that caught the light, giving the statue an animating gaze. Now, stripped of these inlays, the eyes remain as empty sockets, yet they are far from lifeless. There is a presence there, an expectancy, as though the idol remembers the centuries it has survived, and waits for someone who might understand. Its gaze does not merely follow the visitor, it inhabits the space itself, as if the land and the figure are one, and together they watch quietly across the expanse of time. Imagine the world in which this idol was first placed. The Akkadian Empire was vast, its cities bustling with merchants, scribes, and priests. Soldiers marched through dusty streets, their bronze armor glinting in the sun. Canals ran like arteries, carrying water and life across the plains. At the heart of these settlements, the palaces of kings rose high, their walls inscribed with victories, their gates adorned with images of gods and symbols of power. Naram Sin, the grandson of Sargon, declared himself divine during his reign, wearing a horned crown and demanding homage as one would give to a god. It is within this world of human ambition and divine aspiration that the copper idol was created, a symbol both of earthly authority and celestial connection. The idol may have stood in a temple, or perhaps in the court of the king, its polished legs and torso catching the glow of oil lamps and torchlight. Firelight would have danced along the contours of its bronze, making the muscles ripple and the body appear alive. The hollow eyes, once inlaid with bright stone, would have reflected the flickering flames, and in those reflections, worshippers might have felt they saw the gaze of a living deity. The idol was not merely decoration, it was a presence, an intermediary between mortals and the divine, a reminder that kings and gods were not so separate, that power was both inherited and bestowed. Over time, however, the world changed. Naram Sin's empire, like all empires, could not endure forever. Drought, rebellion, and invasion weakened the Akkadian hold over Mesopotamia. Cities once thriving with trade and ceremony fell silent. Priests abandoned their temples, the fires that had once illuminated the idols went out. And somewhere in Besetki, the copper idol was toppled or laid aside, its upper body and head lost to time, its cuneiform message buried under layers of soil. It slept beneath the earth, waiting for centuries, until it would be discovered once more by human hands. When archaeologists uncovered the idol in 1975, it was more than a relic. It was a voice reaching out from the past, a bridge connecting modern observers to a world that had vanished. The cuneiform inscription at its base told of dedication and devotion, linking the figure to Naram Sin himself. Those who studied it marveled not only at its artistry but at its endurance, the way the metal had survived the passage of millennia, carrying with it the essence of an era when kings walked like gods and statues were vessels of memory and ambition. And yet, despite its age, there is something timeless about the idol. The empty eyes do not simply stare. They invite reflection, asking us to consider the rise and fall of empires, the fleeting nature of human ambition, and the persistence of presence even in absence. The statue's legs, so carefully modeled, speak of motion, of intention, of the capacity to step forward and command attention. The hollow gaze, paradoxically, makes the figure more alive than any stone carving, for it requires the imagination to fill what is missing, and in doing so, the viewer breathes life back into the metal. Let us now imagine standing before it in the quiet of a museum. The overhead lights softened, the world hushed around you. The statue gleams faintly, green with the patina of time, and for a moment it is easy to see how it might have appeared in its original setting, flickering in torchlight, commanding attention, radiating power. The hollow eyes seem to follow you, not with malice or threat, but with an endless patience. They ask you to remember, to witness, to feel the weight of history pressing gently across the centuries. Perhaps if you close your eyes, you can see Besetki as it once was. Dusty roads stretch between mud brick houses. Children chase one another under the sun. Women grind grain at the edge of canals. Soldiers march in bronze armor, banners flapping in the breeze. Somewhere at the center of this activity, in a courtyard or temple, the copper idol stands. Flames dance along its bronze legs, smoke curls through the air, and for those who dare to approach, the empty eyes seem almost full, reflecting the flickering light, the anticipation of devotion, the memory of divine ambition. The world shifts again, centuries passing, the empire dissolving, the people scattered, the landscape changing under the sun and rain, and yet the idol endures, buried beneath soil, forgotten, awaiting discovery. When it is finally uncovered, it is as though the past sighs, releasing its hold on the present, offering a glimpse into a time when humans first reached for godhood, when metal and fire could hold both memory and presence, when a figure with empty eyes could command the attention of an empire and whisper across time to those who might pause long enough to listen. There is a quiet lesson in this. The idol does not move, it does not speak, it does not command in the conventional sense, and yet it is alive. Alive in its ability to stir imagination, to evoke history, to connect the present with a past that seems impossibly distant and yet achingly close. The hollow eyes are not a deficiency, they are an invitation. They remind us that sometimes the most powerful presence is that which does not dictate, but that which allows us to see, to feel, to imagine. And so, as the light fades and the world outside drifts into evening, consider the copper idol of Besetki, its bronze surface glinting in torchlight long extinguished, its hollow gaze reaching across millennia, its cuneiform inscription still legible, still meaningful, still whispering stories of kings and gods, ambition and devotion, fire and metal, memory and silence. Let yourself linger with it, imagining the soft flicker of flames, the scent of dust and oil, the distant murmur of ancient streets. The idol waits, patient as ever, and in that waiting there is a comfort, a rhythm, a lullaby of history that drifts slowly into the mind, guiding thoughts toward quiet, guiding thoughts toward rest. For in the end, the copper idol does not belong only to the past. It belongs to anyone willing to pause, to look, to imagine. It belongs to the quiet corners of the present, where time stretches, where imagination fills empty eyes, where bronze and fire meet and hold a secret that only those who linger can sense. And in that sense, the idol continues its watch, eternal, unhurried, unbroken, a sentinel of memory and mystery, inviting all who come near to see beyond the metal, beyond the hollow sockets, and into a history that whispers softly, persistently, endlessly. The shadow that stood without a figure. High upon the Axum Plateau, in northern Ethiopia, the land stretches wide and silent beneath skies that have known millennia. The air is dry, but carries a coolness that drifts down from the highlands, wrapping the earth in a soft embrace. Here the sun rises slowly, illuminating stone and soil alike, casting long shadows that stretch and shift across the plains. Some of these shadows are ordinary, following the natural forms of people, trees, or rocks, but others are strange, mysterious, and timeless. Shadows that seem to move of their own accord, that stretch where no form exists, that whisper of stories buried in the earth long before the cities of men rose to command the land. Among these whispers lies a mystery that has fascinated explorers, scholars, and travelers for centuries. The shadow that stands without a figure. On the plateau, ancient obelisks, monoliths, and standing stones rise from the ground, their purpose often obscured by time, their original form partially lost, fractured, or hidden beneath layers of history. Yet even in ruin, their presence is felt. At certain hours of the day, as the sun leans across the eastern horizon, these stones cast shadows that stretch impossibly long, sometimes taking shapes that seem separate from their source, appearing as if a figure has emerged in the light, a silent silhouette hovering above the earth. Let us drift now into this quiet land, this high plateau, imagining the slow, steady rise of the sun. The wind carries the scent of dry grass and stone, of ancient soil that has witnessed kingdoms rise and fall. It carries echoes of footsteps that no longer walk, voices that no longer speak, and the faint rustle of leaves that bend in the breeze like whispers. Step carefully across the plateau, listening to the subtle hum of time itself, feeling the heat of the sun and the coolness of shadow, feeling as though the land itself is aware of your presence. The Axumite civilization once thrived here, and though much of its grandeur has faded into silence, traces remain, obelisks, tombs, and ruins that speak of a society that was powerful, connected, and aware of the cosmos. They carved their stones with precise geometries, lifting massive monoliths to mark graves, commemorate rulers, and honor gods. These structures were more than monuments. They were alignments, markers, talismans, and sometimes perhaps conduits between worlds. And even when fractured by time, when toppled by the earth or by invaders, the stones retained a strange authority, a memory of form and intent that transcended their physical presence. Imagine a lone traveler walking across the plateau. The ground crunches softly beneath sandals, the wind brushing against skin, the sun rising higher. Ahead you see one such obelisk, tall and elegant, fractured but proud. Its shadow falls across the ground, stretching long and thin, and then as the light bends, a phenomenon occurs. The shadow seems to detach, as though the stone itself is no longer the source. The silhouette hovers, elongated, distorted, eerie in its stillness. It moves subtly as the sun climbs, yet its motion does not match the sun's passage entirely. For a moment it feels alive, a presence independent of the stone, a figure conjured from memory, from imagination, from the whispering plateau. These shadows are part natural, part mystery. Perhaps they are remnants of intentional design, the result of angles and sun placement known to the Axumites, who were meticulous in their observation of light, celestial patterns, and geometry. Perhaps they are echoes of ritual, the shadows cast during ceremonies that honored kings, gods, or ancestors. Perhaps in the stillness of the plateau, the land itself remembers the forms that once stood fully erect, now lost to collapse and decay, and recreates them fleetingly in shadow. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the ceremonies that might have taken place here. Priests and priestesses moving slowly around the stones, chanting in low tones that hum through the air, incense curling upward, smoke twisting in the breeze. Offerings of grain, honey, and libations placed carefully at the base of the monoliths. The rising sun glinting off the carved surfaces, the shadows stretching long, some perfectly aligned with distant mountains, some twisting in strange, impossible angles. And as the worshippers move, their voices soft but insistent, the shadows seem to respond, stretching, bending, sometimes forming figures that could not belong to any human form, as if the stones themselves were alive, echoing ancient life through the play of light. Time passes slowly on the plateau. Seasons change, bringing rain that darkens the earth and nourishes sparse vegetation, sun that warms the stones and casts new shadows, wind that sweeps across the land, eroding and reshaping it imperceptibly. The stones remain silent witnesses. Yet the shadow that stands without a figure continues its quiet performance, bending and lengthening, as though aware of the rhythms of light, as though holding vigil for a world that no longer exists. Travelers centuries apart have looked upon it and felt the same unease, the same wonder, the same sense that the land is speaking in a language older than words, older than kings, older than human memory. The people of Aksum would have understood something about this. They were astronomers, as well as builders, careful observers of the heavens. They raised obelisks not merely as markers of power, but as instruments to track the sun, the stars, the solstices, and equinoxes, as if the earth itself could be measured and understood through the interplay of stone and light. Shadows were more than absence, they were substance. They told time, conveyed intent, and connected mortals with the divine. A shadow detached from its object might have been interpreted as a spirit, an ancestor, a divine messenger, or a warning. Imagine walking slowly along the line of these monoliths in the early morning, dew underfoot, the sun still low, shadows stretching long across the plateau. Some shadows fall as expected, aligned perfectly with other stones, reflecting the knowledge of the architects. Others seem wrong, slightly off, defying explanation, dancing just at the edge of perception. The mind seeks to interpret them, to name them, to grasp them, but they remain elusive. They are shadows that remember, shadows that anticipate, shadows that exist in a realm between presence and absence. As the sun rises higher, the detached shadows shift, twist, and lengthen. Perhaps at noon, they disappear entirely, merging with the stone itself. Perhaps at sunset, they reappear, stretched across valleys, pointing to distant peaks, moving slowly with an eerie autonomy. They cast themselves across rock, soil, grass, and memory. They remind anyone who observes them that the world has layers unseen, that light can reveal more than form, that even absence can assert presence. These shadows carry stories that cannot be spoken. Perhaps one was cast in honor of a king whose name is now forgotten. Perhaps another in devotion to gods whose faces have been lost. Perhaps a shadow lingered to mark a place of mourning, of triumph, of ritual no longer understood. Over centuries, the wind, rain, and human activity have altered the stones, broken them, shifted them. Yet the shadow continues to emerge in certain conditions, as if the plateau itself remembers the intentions of those who built it, as if the land carries memory in its angles, its texture, its contours. Now imagine standing alone on the plateau at dusk. The sun hangs low, a soft golden glow washing across the stones. The air is still, almost imperceptibly warm, the sound of distant streams and rustling leaves faint but present. You notice one shadow in particular, long, thin, humanoid, impossibly precise. It stretches across the ground, its form unconnected to any stone that remains. You step closer, its edges quiver slightly. It seems to breathe. You step back. It continues, silent and autonomous. For a moment you cannot tell if it belongs to this world or another. You feel the weight of centuries pressing lightly against your consciousness. You are alone. You are not alone. The shadow waits. Legends have grown around these anomalies. Local inhabitants speak of spirits inhabiting the stones, of ancestral presences made visible only through shadow, of warnings cast across the land for those who do not honor the past. Travelers have reported chills, a sense of being watched, a feeling that the plateau itself is alive. Scientists and archaeologists offer explanations of light, perspective, and erosion, and yet no formula can account for the eerie perfection, the detachment, the autonomy of certain shadows. They remain enigmas, as mysterious now as when they were first cast. And so the shadow stands without a figure, day after day, season after season, century after century. It moves slowly with the sun, but its motion is deliberate, almost thoughtful. It reminds us that the world is not limited to what we see, that presence can exist without form, that time itself is pliable, capable of stretching a single moment into centuries. And as night falls, as the last rays of sun leave the plateau, the shadow contracts, shrinks, and disappears into the folds of darkness, leaving only memory behind, both of its existence and of our attempt to understand it. Even in darkness, the story continues. The stones remain, the wind whispers, the plateau holds its breath, and when the first light returns, the shadow re-emerges, a phantom, a sentinel, a memory of what once stood, and what continues to stand, unseen yet undeniable. In the quiet of night, imagine the plateau empty. The stars shine over the highlands, casting a pale light over the obelisks and standing stones. The shadow, now invisible, waits patiently beneath the earth, in the soil and memory, ready to stretch once more when sun touches stone. Its presence is a lullaby, a slow rhythm of light and absence that invites the mind to wander, to imagine, to drift, to rest. And so, as you drift with it, the shadow that stands without a figure continues to exist, not merely in light, not merely in stone, but in perception, in imagination, in the slow unfolding of awareness that transcends time. It is there when you look. It is there when you close your eyes. It is there when you dream. And in that quiet, patient presence, the plateau breathes, the stones remember, and the shadow waits, eternal, unhurried, and endlessly mysterious. The black stone that drank the rain. High in the southern reaches of Morocco, where the desert begins its endless stretch of golden sand and sun-baked plains, there lies a place of stone, shadow, and memory. Ait Ben Hadu rises from the earth like a dream, frozen in black basalt and ochre clay, a ksar whose walls have stood for centuries, bearing witness to the passage of traders, caravans, and wandering travelers. It is here that the black stone waits. Ancient, silent, absorbing, holding within it the rare touch of rain that falls sparingly in this arid land. Its surface glistens after each downpour, a dark mirror catching the fleeting light, drinking the water, and holding it, as though the stone itself were alive, as though it remembers each drop, each storm, each century that has passed above it. The Qasar of Ait Ben Hadu is not merely a settlement. It is a living memory of humanity's ability to carve permanence from impermanence. Its walls, built from black basalt and earth, rise in terraced forms, stacked and compacted to withstand wind, sun, and the passing centuries. Narrow streets wind between high walls, twisting in labyrinthine patterns, while watchtowers guard the edges of the village like quiet sentinels. And among these stones lies the black basalt, absorbing sun and shadow, storing the rare desert rain in its porous depths. It is an object of quiet fascination, for it seems to hold the life of water in a land where water is scarce and precious, a slow and deliberate witness to centuries of human endurance. Imagine walking along these streets at dawn, when the first light of sun brushes over the clay walls, turning them gold, turning their shadows long and soft. The black stone waits in quiet corners, near wells, near thresholds, near courtyards where life continues in slow, patient rhythm. It is not just stone, it is memory, a receptacle of history and nature, a silent observer of all that unfolds. The rains here are rare, falling only sporadically, yet when they come, they are powerful and transformative. Ait Ben Hadu, with its black basalt foundations, drinks deeply. The water seeps into the stone, darkening its surface, making it glisten like glass in the fleeting light. For those who live here, the rain is a blessing, a renewal, a miracle, and for the black stone, it is sustenance, a slow, deliberate absorption of life-giving moisture that it releases over days and nights, retaining in its depths the memory of clouds, the sound of rain striking clay and stone, the freshness of the desert air. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. The first drops fall on the warm stone, hissing softly, evaporating into steam and cooling the air around them. Children laugh and run through narrow alleyways, splashing through puddles that form briefly in hollows of the Qasar. Women tilt jars to catch water for cooking and cleaning, the sound of clay meeting water echoing off the stone walls. And in the midst of all this, the black stone drinks, slowly and silently, holding each droplet as though it were precious beyond imagining. It is easy to forget that stones, while seeming inert, carry their own histories. Black basalt is formed from volcanic activity, hardened from molten fire, millions of years ago. It is dense, impervious, enduring. Yet within its darkness, there are tiny pores, minuscule spaces where water can linger. The black stone of Ait Ben Hadu uses these spaces as vessels, drawing in rain and holding it against the harsh desert climate. Over centuries, it has absorbed countless storms, countless drops of life, each one a silent witness to human activity, to footsteps and voices, to the rhythm of daily life in a Qasar that has stood against the passage of time. Imagine an evening in Ait Ben Hadu after a rainstorm. The streets are damp, the clay walls darkened by moisture, and the black stone gleams softly in the dimming light. Torches flicker along the walls, casting shadows that dance across the wet surfaces, echoing like whispers of centuries past. Traders settle in their small rooms, tired from journeys across sand and rock. The sound of water trickling through the stones reaches your ears, subtle but persistent, a reminder that even in dryness, life endures. The black stone has drunk its fill, and the memory of the rain remains, quiet and steadfast. For travelers and historians alike, this stone has always been mysterious. Why does it seem to retain water more than surrounding rocks? Why does it gleam longer, remain damp after hours in sun? The answer is part natural, part wonder. Basalt is inherently dense and porous, yes, but there is something in the placement, in the arrangement of the Qasar, in the ancient builder's awareness of the land and the elements, that gives the stone its remarkable capacity to capture the desert rain. And perhaps, too, there is something more. Perhaps the stone is not merely mineral, but memory, absorbing not just water, but the passage of centuries, the presence of human activity, the rhythm of life in a land defined by scarcity and endurance. Step deeper into the imagination. Imagine the Kasar in its earliest days, walls newly built, terraces compact and proud. Caravans arrive laden with salt, gold, spices. Traders speak in hushed tones, negotiating deals that will ripple across the Sahara. Children run among the narrow streets, animals bray and clatter, women carry water and food for families. And among all this life, the black stone rests, absorbing the occasional rainfall, glistening after storms, witnessing the ebb and flow of human history. It sees the comings and goings of those who build, destroy, and rebuild, and yet it remains, patient and enduring, a silent participant in the story of At Ben-Haddo. Time stretches across centuries, empires rise and fall, Morocco becomes home to dynasties, kingdoms, and traders from distant lands. The Kasar survives, though some walls crumble, and some stones are replaced or repaired. Yet the black stone persists, unchanged, absorbing each rare rainstorm, retaining the memory of moisture, of life, of history. Imagine yourself now walking along the terraces after a storm. The sun has broken through clouds, casting gold across wet black surfaces. The stone glistens beneath your feet, small puddles forming in its crevices. You run your fingers over its surface, feeling the coolness, the subtle roughness, the texture that has endured centuries. Perhaps in this moment, the stone drinks from you as well, absorbing your presence, your thought, your attention. It remembers the touch, adding it to its quiet reservoir of memory. Evenings bring a unique magic. As the sun sets, shadows stretch across the Kasar. The black stone reflects the changing light, absorbing it in its dark depths, glowing subtly as torches are lit along walls. Children listen to stories of ancient travelers, of ancestors who once crossed deserts in search of water, of merchants whose caravans brought wealth and knowledge. The stone remains silent, yet attentive. It drinks not only the rare desert rain, but also the stories, the laughter, the whispers that fill the air. In the quiet of night, imagine the Kasar empty. The streets are silent. The wind sweeps across the plateau, rustling clay and stone. The black stone glimmers faintly under moonlight, holding the memory of day, of rain, of life. It has drunk the water, the light, the presence of centuries, and it continues to hold it, patient and unyielding. Perhaps it whispers these memories to the wind, which carries them across dunes, across time, across imagination. The black stone is more than stone. It is history, memory, endurance, patience. It teaches us that life can persist in the smallest details, in rare rain in a desert, in the slow absorption of centuries. It is a lullaby of presence, a reminder that even when the world is dry, even when life is scarce, there are vessels that carry memory, that endure, that drink deeply and quietly, sustaining themselves and those who notice them. And as you drift along the Kasar, feeling the warmth of black stone beneath your fingers, listening to the subtle trickle of water in its crevices, seeing the glint of rare sunlight across its surface, you feel a calm, you feel a rhythm that is slow, deliberate, enduring. The black stone waits patiently, as it has for centuries, as it will for centuries to come. It drinks, it holds, it remembers, and in this quiet presence, you too begin to drift. You follow the stone's patience, the Kasar's endurance, the desert's whisper. You breathe in rhythm with the plateau, with the wind, with the memory of water absorbed by black basalt, and you sink slowly into a quiet, gentle rest. The black stone of Ait Ben-Hadou continues to hold the rain, the sun, the centuries, and you, in this endless cycle of presence and memory. It is patient, enduring, eternal. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the mysteries of the past. If you enjoyed exploring these ancient secrets, don't forget to like and subscribe for more discoveries. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep wondering, and let the secrets of history guide your imagination.